the Science of Sport podcast with sports editor Mike Finch and sports scientist Professor Ross Tucker.
It's our end of the year podcast after 2025, and we're going to take a chance over the next hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours, to kind of bring you what we think has been the highlights of this year in a sports science context, not only from the sports science context, but also from a sporting context in terms of performances of athletes and some of the disappointments and achievements of teams and individuals in the world of sport. As you heard in the intro, I'm along with here Professor Ross Tucker's with me, but also Gareth Davies, the mayor of our Discourse channel, who is here joining us as well. And of course, you will hear Ross and Gareth throughout the year talking on our Spotlight highlights channel, our podcast throughout the year, where they look at all the news events from throughout the year. So it's fitting that we have Gareth along with us with us today. So what we're going to do is we've kind of come up with a whole bunch of different categories that we're going to look at, and we're probably going to digress a bit and chat a bit off the topic and maybe even disagree once in a while with each other. And what we've done is we've come up with categories throughout the year, and we haven't told each other what our winners of those individual categories are until we do this podcast. So instead of planning this too much, we've decided we're going to go away. We're going to look at the different categories ourselves, and we're going to say, right, we think our newsmaker of the year is this person. And then when we come to that section, we're going to then talk and discuss with each other whether we agree or disagree with each other. And potentially, and I don't think this is going to be possible, but potentially we might we might have a consensus on it. But I somehow doubt that we will. There will probably be 3 winners in each of the categories. So Ross, I want to ask you first, how difficult was it to narrow it down to the individual winners of our different sections? Is it one of those things where you have to sort of make a choice between your top 3?
Mike, we couldn't even narrow it down to categories. That's how difficult it was. Like Gareth started like a month ago on Discourse, which is basically our listener community. If you become a supporter of the Science of Sport, you get access to this community, and we chucked out a few ideas based on last year. But then you realize that you haven't covered all the stories you think you want to cover, so you make up a new one, and then you realize you neglected another one. So we couldn't even do that. But these awards things in general are complete shit show, excuse the French. You look at World Athletics when they had to choose theirs, and they didn't even shortlist the 2 best athletes, never mind pick the best one, and then they picked one who didn't even race more than a few times in the global scene. Anyway, anyway, the point I'm trying to make is don't take this too seriously at home, folks. But what we hope we do, I think, is give a good overview on some of the insights stuff. So we've kind of forced some of the categories to allow us to have conversations about some of the sports science topics that we've covered this year. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Gareth, what was the process like for you?
It's a lot easier for me because I've got the backing of like hundreds of people behind me providing ideas. So all I've got to do is cherry pick their best ideas, just pretend that it was my idea, and all's good on my side of things. So I'm going to sort of represent the community.
What's that saying about
throwing my own?
Anything that was ever designed by committee is a camel? You heard that saying?
I've not heard that one, no.
Yeah, I remember when I did a bit of management, the guy I worked with said to me, there's a danger when you let people vote on these kind of things because you end up designing camels or something like that. You can figure out what that means.
Yeah, but I get the final word.
We'll give it to you.
Yes, exactly.
It's committee with the dictator. So. And they, what can they do about it? They're not in the room.
Yeah, having been involved in the media industry for years and also seeing different award ceremonies throughout the years, I always think that award ceremonies are designed to be controversial by their nature, because essentially what you've got is a whole bunch of people, and so much of it is subjective. So, even when there's clear winners, sometimes there's always going to be people who don't believe in a clear winner. And, that I think that by their very nature, award ceremonies are controversial, and that's what makes them interesting. People discuss them and say, I agree or I disagree or whatever. And I kind of think, for our Discourse members and those who are following us, we're very open to hearing your thoughts on our thoughts, which I think is part of the process.
I'm going to immediately disagree with you, Mike. I think award ceremonies are just backslapping, aren't they? They're just confirmation of what we already knew or what the organisers want you to know, just to give their favourites the plaudits.
Yeah. Who's going to be the... Yeah. Anyway, there won't be much backslapping in this one. In fact, we're going to put the knife into sports science on this one.
Oh, yeah, go on.
All right, then let's kick it off now. And our first category of the year, and that was our sporting event or moment of the year. And Gareth, I want to ask you to tell us what yours is first, and then we'll go Ross and then myself, and let's hear what your sporting event or moment of the year was.
But it was a fairly clear one for me personally. It was the World Athletics Championships in Tokyo. I thought there were just so many superb races. The marathon, do you remember that 800 meters? Now, the 800 meters for men, I think Donald knocked it out of the park with that one, because I went back and watched it earlier as a little bit of research. And Isaac Nader, do you remember him coming off the final bend? I think he was in about ninth place and picked Whiteman by
Just for the sake of clarity, that was the 1500, Gareth, not the 8.
1500, did I say 800?
Yeah,
Sorry, the 1500.
yeah.
Just got the wrong race off the bat there. Very early in the morning here. I'm just making my excuses before we even start. But yeah, the whole championships was brilliant. And what I found was it's one of those events where the scarcity adds the value, because we don't see these people competing against each other often enough, I don't think. And that adds meaning. And because I was immersed in it, because we were covering on a daily basis, the more immersed you are, the more you get out of it. And so that's why, to me, it really was the event of the year.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of that 1500 meters reminds me of that famous video that you often see on social media, of the American in the 800, I think it's the 800, where he literally comes from behind. He's wearing a cap.
Dave Wattle was in the
and
1970
Dave
something
Wattle,
Olympics.
That's right, yeah. And he literally comes from the back and wins the race. And I always think it was reminiscent of that performance.
Just on that,
really from way back.
Yeah, bit of trivia from Mordor, as they say in Narnia, as they say on the Lantern Rouge podcast. Bit of trivia for you, linked to something we discussed on the pod. The 800 pacing strategy is really interesting because nobody runs their best time running a negative split, but Wattle did in that race. In fact, that was the last world record in the 800 to be run with a negative split. And since that, which was, I want to say 76, for some reason I'm like, if this was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I'd be torn between 72 and 76. I think it was 76. Maybe someone can look that up for me while I natter on. Since that, the world record in the 800 got like 3 and a bit seconds faster, entirely because the first lap sped up, not the second. So he ran a massive negative split to break that world record and win that Olympic gold. But a pacing physiology trivia stuck into your analogy.
Yeah, that's a. So I'm just trying to look up that famous. See, it was 1972 actually, the 800 meters in the Summer Olympics in Munich. That was quite a way back. But see, we're already digressing. But it was interesting that I get fed that video. I don't know, probably once every couple of weeks for some reason. They seem very interested. The algorithm in sending me that video.
I have
because you're the editor of a running magazine. I've never even seen it.
You're going to get it now because Instagram's listening to you. Just like I've been getting advertisements for mattresses for the last few weeks. And so is Gerald, one of our listeners. And Formula One. I'm now an Instagram Formula One expert. Just on the world champs. So Nader wins the 800, the 1500.
1500.
That was a big surprise. There were so many surprises at those world championships. Quiz time. Can you name the winners of the steeplechase, the 5 and the 10 in the men?
Beamish.
Yeah.
Beamish won the steeplechase.
I wish I could help you with this, but I can't.
Not one of them was expected.
It feels like a long way away.
Oh.
Yeah.
No. Because the East Africans didn't have a great time, did they, on the track?
They were awful.
In the distance.
Awful. So the 5,000 was Cole Hocker.
Oh, right, yeah.
Remember, having been disqualified from the 15, he came back and won. And the 10,000, if there's a single person in the whole world who picked Beamish, Hocker, and Jimmy Gressier to win the 10,000 meter world title, it would be not one in 8 billion people would have forecast that combination. Completely crazy.
How could I forget Jimmy?
Yeah.
But the whole championships was like that. Remember the marathon finishes?
Yeah, because and that was the point I was going to make,
is
that in those middle distance races, the cumulative margin of victory was only slightly larger across all the distance races for men, including the marathon, only slightly larger than Melissa Jefferson Wooden won the 100 meters by. That's how close the men's. Mm-hmm. So my sports moment of the year is the final straight of the Tokyo World Championships. Just the final straight.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
How about you, Mike?
Well, I mean, you talked about the World Champ. I mean, the reason why the World Championships is, and trying to remember those middle distance races is tricky. But I made my Sportswoman of the Year, one of those categories. Melissa Jefferson Wooden, I thought was my Sportswoman of the Year because she was kind of hiding. When I say hiding, she'd obviously won gold and won relay medals at the World Championships before, but she suddenly came through as a sort of dominant sprinter at the World Championships and sort of established herself as that person. When everybody else was talking about the 2022 and 2023 and the Jamaicans and that sort of thing, she just came along and basically took everybody out. So she was my Sportswoman of the Year purely because for me, she literally came out of not obscurity, but came out of relative obscurity to now become the dominant sprinter in the world, and I thought she ran phenomenally well.
Well,
yeah, so that's
it. Yeah, it's astonishing that she didn't win Track Athlete of the Year.
yeah.
But why? So why is that? That's because I don't know this for sure, but I think there's a little bit of doubt about it.
Because who did win Track Athlete of the Year?
Sydney McLaughlin-Rowan for the
Sydney
400.
McLaughlin. Okay, I was going to say. So she was obviously the second most. Yeah,
I don't think she was she?
Sydney McLaughlin.
I don't think.
I don't think.
I don't think she was in the
I don't
top
think
five. This year.
Jefferson Wooden was second. I'm just checking now.
No, Jefferson Wooden didn't even get
I know. So I
shortlisted.
don't think she was second. No. Yeah, I'm not saying she was second, but yeah, Sydney McLaughlin was obviously what would be between the two of them, I would think.
See, I don't
so
know
that-
about that because remember, World Athletics announced their shortlist, and Jefferson Wooden, Kipyegon, and Beatrice Chebet, not one of them made that list, and that was to make like the
Yeah,
top five.
yeah.
So the people we chose
Yeah.
as our best athletes didn't even make their top five, and then they had Boll and Sydney McLaughlin-Rowan on it. It was just nuts. I don't know. That's why I made that joke earlier on about designing camels.
Isn't it based on sort of points that they established throughout the year that relate to consistency and performances and sort of Diamond League events and that sort of thing? So maybe they're working on a point system.
No, because like Sydney
I think it was-
McLaughlin-Rowan doesn't run Diamond League events, and Jefferson ran a lot of them and wasn't beaten all year. So if it points, then Jefferson Wooden's winning
Yeah.
it. And I mean, I
Yeah,
suppose, okay, neither McLaughlin-Rowan or Jefferson Wooden set a world record, but let's be fair, both of them are chasing doped world records. That's the problem in the
Well,
1, 2,
suffice
4.
to say, World Athletics got it. We can confidently say World Athletics got it wrong.
With the confidence
We
of
had
an
this
awards
conversation,
ceremony.
Mike, on a spotlight. We had this conversation, Ross and I. So out of the five, we had Femke Bol, Beatrice Chebet, Jefferson Wooden, Kipyegon, and McLaughlin-Rowan. Who would have been your two for the final out of that? Obviously Jefferson Wooden then.
Yes, and then McLaughlin would have been, that would have been the top two athletes track athletes, because we're not counting Mr. Pole Vault. But
No, it's a woman
yes,
now,
I mean
so.
certainly track athletes. Yeah, women. Yeah.
I wouldn't have put
So,
McLaughlin-Rowan in my top
fairly
3
obvious.
this year. I wouldn't have made Sydney McLaughlin in top 3 this year, for the same reason as in the past. Like, she ran a lot more this year because she did those Grand Slam track events. I want to come to that in a moment. But like, it's I don't know. I think the world's just a little bit drunk on. It's the same thing that happened with football all those years. Once Messi and Ronaldo started winning it, they were winning it all the time. And I get the impression it's the same thing with Duplantis. And yeah, they deserve to be in the conversation. But I would have gone Jefferson Wooden, Chebet, and then maybe Kipyegon. But to me, those two were clearly better than everyone else. So then the question is, why was Jefferson Wooden overlooked? And that's sort of point I was making earlier is, I think her association with Dennis Mitchell has put a lot of people off. And then something interesting came out the other day. When Grand Slam Track filed for bankruptcy, literally in the last week, they published a list of their creditors, their top 20, and in amongst those, you could see the athletes and their agents. And Jefferson Wooden is represented by a guy called Mark Block, who was banned for a decade because of his association with some dodgy dealings in the sport. So I wonder whether people in the sport are looking and saying, hang on, we don't want to award this because we want to see where the chips fall on this one.
And that's why the Kenyans didn't get a look in either.
Maybe.
So we had
Yeah.
Femke Bol in there. But
Could be.
I mean, your agent, just having an agent doesn't mean anything at all, does it? That's just somebody represents you. They're not anything to do with your coaching. They're not going to be
I don't
anything
know.
to do with doping.
When Kenyans get done, everyone says go after the agents. Well, now why not when Americans are being discussed? So
I mean, Grand Slam track. I think we're going to come back to that one later because when we talk about sporting failures of the year, that's got to be up there as an all-timer. But I did see these tweets where they've was it leaked, these list of creditors, or is it just an open legal document? I don't know.
I don't know actually, because when you file for bankruptcy, it might be that it's got to be disclosed, public documents, and you can see.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
Did you see this, Mike? Did you see that Citius Mag was on there?
Yes, because I think they were sort of partners in this, as far as I see, because they do some fantastic stuff on their various platforms in terms of content. I think they're one of the best in terms of track and field, and they did a lot of work for them, I think, in terms of promoting it.
They're owed $250,000 by Grand Slam Track. So Grand Slam Track were obviously paying them for the coverage, but obviously they've never got the money. So
I saw some controversy about that, in the sense that they didn't disclose that they were being paid to do the promotions, and I didn't know what to make of that, because you're a media outlet.
If you're a partner?
Yeah, like you're a media outlet and you're being paid to promote something, so you're giving it lots of coverage on social media. You might have done that anyway. Maybe because you're a partner, you're getting paid, you do 30% more than you would have done. Is it a problem to not disclose that? There was a big discussion on social media about that yesterday. I don't know what to make of that. But
yeah, I think that's a bit of a fuss about nothing, to be honest with you. They said they're in partnership with them. Do you have to divulge all your financial dealings with the company?
I kind of get what Ross is saying, and to some extent as a media brand, but I think it'd be interesting to see if Citis were down on their list of sponsors or suppliers. If they were, then it was obvious that they were a partner. If they weren't necessarily, then yes, there would be some issues with that, because essentially they're doing promotions, and if they were sort of putting promotions up as partner content or sponsored, making it clear that these particular stuff are sponsored, then at least you know that those elements are sponsored. But I think you have to disclose what is sponsored, what isn't, strictly speaking.
You can see from this why the athletes went for it, because our Sydney's, she's owed $356,000.
There's a few athletes.
There's a lot of money.
Just before we move on,
a couple of years on our Patreon channel.
If every single person listens to this and donates us a monthly pledge to become supporters, then we will maybe reach half that in 10 years. Just before we move on to another category, Sportswoman of the Year, my honourable mention would be, because this year...
Can I throw in my sporting event of the year before you guys continue?
Okay, we're going sports event. You finish up, yeah.
So
wrap that one up.
We've digressed. So you guys have both gone with the World Athletics Championships, and Ross, were you with the finishing straight of the World Athletics Championships? My call, and having looked at the various things throughout the year, has been the 2025 Ryder Cup. I think that in terms of just pure drama and all of the controversy around that particular event, the fact that the Europeans won that on American soil, the fact that there was this crowd involvement where the crowd was particularly aggressive towards the Europeans, and then the Europeans basically through Shane Lowry just kind of won this at the death. And the celebrations and the videos and the pictures that you saw were just of these Europeans just going absolutely crazy. I thought that was an absolutely amazing sporting event, purely because it's in a sport where it is individualistic in many ways, golf. You suddenly have this event which kind of is out of the nowhere. It's become a team event, and I've never really grasped the fact as to why the Ryder Cup is so important to golfers to play it. But on this particular event, it changed my mind about that. The way that the players were so passionate about it really changed my mind about why the Ryder Cup is important, because it's the only event where they can compete as a team. And I thought the drama there was incredible. So that would be my sporting event of the year.
Yeah, and the Europeans get that team thing better than the Americans do. I think that was covered, like that they seem to embrace and capitalize on that more effectively. That's a good mention, actually. And in fact, if I could have a runner-up, it was also going to be golf, because when McIlroy won the Masters early this year, I stayed up until 1 a.m. here in South Africa to watch it, because it was completely gripping, the back nine, because it was the tension, the fact that he'd been in that position and lost it before. But golf creates that, because you see it unfolding so slowly, and you're saying, what's going to happen next? And the Ryder Cup especially, that last day of the Ryder Cup, I reckon is probably some of the best TV sport almost every time. Because at any given moment, there are 5 things happening on the course, more sometimes, And when it's close, any one of those five things, you could literally switch off for 5 minutes and come back 5 minutes later, and the picture looks completely different. This year was funny because the Europeans were so far ahead going into the singles on the third day that it looked like a foregone conclusion. Then suddenly it wasn't. So it went from being an anticlimax to being like a super tense. It was tremendous. If we had to, I didn't vote for that one, but that was definitely in the top three, I reckon.
Yeah, yeah, it was, as you say, it was one of those rare events that just kind of, even if you're not a golfing fan, sometimes you get wrapped up in what's happening at the Ryder Cup, and you'll see it later on. I've got a mention of the disappointment around that in terms of the crowds, but we'll get into that a bit later.
Cool.
Our second category we had was Newsmaker of the Year, and this obviously opens itself up massively to a lot of debate as to what that person is. For me, I thought Max Verstappen was probably my newsmaker of the year purely because even though he didn't win the World Championships, he was probably the best driver of the year. If you look about what the other drivers were saying about him post the final Grand Prix where Lando Norris won the World Championships, people were saying Max Verstappen was in the same league as Michael Schumacher. He was the next Schumacher, purely because he'd come from nowhere. He didn't have a particularly good car. But he'd literally driven himself. He'd gone beyond what the car could do in terms of its performance. So for me, even though we don't cover a lot of Formula One on this particular podcast, I thought that Max Verstappen, when people are likening him to the Schumachers of this world, I think that it's worth noting that he's been lauded by his contemporaries as one of the greats.
Can you define newsmaker of the year? Sorry, then, because I don't. Is it who was making the news headlines? I read this one as.
I think he. Well, yeah, he was making the news headlines for me purely because I think Formula One has made big strides in terms of becoming more generally known amongst both the American and European, even the non-Formula One public. So Max Verstappen is not just somebody who's just driving a car. I think he's a personality within the sporting world, and he's also quite outspoken. I think he's controversial in lots of different ways, and I think that anybody, even if you don't follow Formula One, you probably know who he is. So for me, he was the talk of the town in terms of news. That was my interpretation of it. But yeah, I'm interested to hear what your take on that was, Gareth.
It's a left field pick, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, left field, because I don't walk in Formula One circles particularly. I mean, I do watch it, but I would have said that Lando Norris, who eventually won it, would have won it, or been more in the news, or the two McLarens, because they continually cocked up their tactics, didn't they, and got disqualified, things like that. I'd have said they're in the news more than Verstappen. I would have said he was almost like a bit part character, personally. But perhaps that's because I don't really follow Formula One. I mean, perhaps it's not the algorithm isn't giving me that news. I don't know.
I still
Russ,
find
your thoughts on that?
I still don't know how to distinguish the best driver separate from the best car. I still don't know how anyone does that in Formula One. I suppose when the guy's contemporaries, the other drivers are saying it about him, then you really have to sit up and take notice because they would probably know.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, I still don't know how you can tell the best driver in a world where one car is so superior. And we've said this before, the difference between cars is bigger than the difference between drivers. So I'm not sure how that works. Don't at me, F1 fans.
Well, there was a quote by Romain Grosjean, who's one of the Formula One drivers. He said, "Max Verstappen, I have got to say, this year the outstanding driver of all of them." He continued, "He didn't have a good car, lost a lot of points, and it was a miracle that he came back in the fight in Abu Dhabi. There was no way he should have been there. And finishing only 2 points behind Lando is outstanding." So that was Romain Grosjean, who was one of his contemporaries. So
imagine the tennis headline was, imagine next year Roger Federer is quoted as saying, Yannick Sinner hasn't been bad this year, but he hasn't had a good tennis racket. But it's amazing that he's made the final at 3 Grand Slams playing with like a piece of rubbish wooden tennis racket. Like,
yeah, because I think, as you say, the Formula One, the cars are a good car makes the biggest difference. But I think in this circumstance, he's one of those rare drivers who, despite a poor car, he went against the grain and was competitive in the World Championships. And I think the general consensus amongst the drivers is that that's exactly what happened. So, he is that person who defied the technological advantages
Yeah,
of the other drivers.
I was
maybe.
just looking. Yeah,
Gareth,
you're probably
give
right.
me your
Maybe.
Go on. I was just going to say you're probably right because he was driving for Red Bull, and he
yeah.
came second, obviously, and the other Red Bull driver was 17th. So he was obviously
Yes.
doing something right compared to somebody who had the same car as him. So you're probably right there. He probably was the best driver. I just don't think the column inches really reflected it. And so for column inches, I was personally going to go for Pogacar because in our world of endurance sports, what we see is everything was about Pogacar. Everything you see in cycling is about Pogacar. So whether you like it or not, of a newsmaker of the year for me, it was him that stood head and shoulders above everybody else in terms of making the news, getting the people talking about the sport.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. The only reason why I would say that Pogacar, I think Pogacar makes a lot of centimeters in cycling media, whether he does in the wider media. I would guess, I would say Verstappen still is a bigger name in the world of wider sport, but I mean certainly in our space, as you say, Pogacar was the headline maker in many ways. Ross, what are your thoughts on Pogacar?
It's been interesting because obviously through our discourse and science of sport lens, it comes up a lot. There's even a thread over on discourse called Pogacar dominance, and the one interesting thing about that is the lengths that some people go to say is not that dominant, because he didn't win all the monuments and he didn't win Roubaix and he wasn't the dominant guy in Milan-San Remo. And my argument to that is, write a list of all the guys who've won multiple Grand Tours in a dominant fashion, who win 2 or 3 monuments a year, and who are still also competitive at Paris-Roubaix and Milan-San Remo. How long's that list? So to me...
There's only one.
Exactly. So to me, the fact that Pogacar is competitive in Roubaix and Milan-San Remo, and then wins in a dominant fashion Flanders, Liège, what was the last one? Lombardia, the Tour de France, like whistling his way to the finish line. I mean, it's unbelievable dominance. I've never seen it in cycling.
Totally.
So from a purely
Yeah,
cycling lens, that's true. I mean, there was a little bit of an outcry. BBC named their shortlist for Sports Person of the Year, and he didn't make that list. So to your point earlier, Mike, it shows you where the rest of the world puts cycling. He's like clearly the most dominant athlete in our ecosystem, but he's not making that list, which is got someone from darts on it. I think is Littler on that list again. Gareth, I know you love the BBC
Yeah,
Sports
probably.
Person.
Yeah, I think he is. But I mean, he would be the overseas sports personality of the year anyway.
No, he
Pogacar.
wasn't. He wasn't
Is
nominated.
Littler's the darts players.
He wasn't, was he?
No, that's what I'm saying. There was like a big thing about that because I saw a
Oh.
list of the nominees for that award, and I don't think, maybe cross-check me like he did on Wattle, but I'm leaning towards he didn't make that shortlist for overseas personality, and that shows you something about it. Like it's just we're so immersed in it, we see it as obvious, but the rest of the world isn't even paying attention.
Yeah, as much as I pay attention to sports personality of the year, to be honest with you. I think Mike's pick actually now makes more sense. If you look at it as a global thing, the newsmaker of the year, perhaps Verstappen, but then you'd have to look at football, wouldn't you? Soccer.
Yeah.
And probably the Man United manager, Amorim. He's probably got more column inches over here in the UK, at least in football. But we don't think about things like that because we don't tend to move in those circles. So perhaps we just tend to live in a very small pool.
Yeah, but that's fine. We're happy in our pool.
Exactly.
I
Ross,
am
what's
anyway.
your pool pick?
My newsmaker of the year. So like close one between 2 here, actually 3. But my joint 2 would be Sinner Alcaraz, because they absolutely completely dominated tennis, to the extent that if you watched a tournament in which they were not playing and they didn't make the final was almost not worth watching. And that's both good at the moment for tennis, but such a huge risk, because when the Australian Open starts and they're on opposite sides of that draw, if one of them loses a quarter or a semi-final, imagine that. I think the anticlimax. I'd be fascinated to know how many people turn off when they're not playing compared to when they play against each other. And they made 3 of the 4 Grand Slam finals. They were in the French Open final, which was probably the tennis match of the year. Sinner really should have won that. He'll feel like he dominated 60% of that match and lost it. Then Wimbledon, and then the US Open, where Alcaraz absolutely destroyed him. And then, of course, they played in the ATP finals as well, and a whole bunch of Tennis Masters 1000. So for 2 characters to dominate, and then Sinner, of course, is also a newsmaker in other ways, not so good. Because whilst his doping positive was the year before, that doping ban, or I suppose it's a ban, but actually it's a period off the sport by agreement is what it ended up being, was a big talking point in the world of anti-doping. So I think Sinner made more news than Alcaraz for not always good reasons. So I would give it to them. My honourable mention was going to go to Aaron D'Souza, who's the guy who founded the Enhanced Games, because that's come up a lot here, because every few weeks there's now this drip feed. There've been a couple more this week, athletes who've joined the Enhanced Games, and that'll be a story in 2026 when we get to those games in Vegas. But my newsmakers of the year would be Sinner and Alcaraz jointly.
Yeah. So Sinner won the Australian and Wimbledon, and Alcaraz the French and the US.
Yeah, and then Sinner won the
Yeah.
Masters 1000 final, the ATP final. So I'd put it in Sinner's court, pardon the pun, as player of the year if I had to. And really, Sinner should have won 3. If Sinner did win that 1 point in France, now, if he wins the French, would he win Wimbledon? Who knows? But I reckon Sinner could have won 3 Grand Slams and the ATP Masters final. It would have been an incredible season for him in amidst all the doping controversy. But anyway, it was 2-2 in the end.
Yeah.
Do you want those nominees for the BBC World Sports Star of the Year?
Go for
Yeah,
it.
let's hear them. Let's hear the second most important
Yeah,
awards of the
Mariona
year.
Caldente, football,
Yeah, fair.
women's footballer.
Yeah,
Terence Crawford, boxing. Armand Duplantis, athletics.
okay, fair.
Fair enough. Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone, athletics. Shohei Ohtani, baseball. And Mo Salah, football. And that's not looking so good now, seeing as he's thrown a dummy out of the pram, hasn't he, lately? So it's just a very odd list to me. There's no Pogacar on there.
Hey, listen, if they publish
Ravana
ours and
Kubo.
it says Verstappen, Sinner, Alcaraz, and what was yours again? Gareth? Pogacar.
The
Pogacar.
Pogacar.
The people going, these guys don't know sport. They don't know what they're talking about. Sports show.
No, I know.
Whatever.
Exactly.
That's
Don't
the
know.
point. Isn't that the point?
That's why I don't like the BBC version. It's way far better.
But we debate the BBC version because, in terms of credibility, you can't deny the credibility of the BBC. So I love
I think
it.
you can ask Donald Trump.
Yes. Well, that has been under
10
fire
billion,
recently.
10 billion reasons to check it.
So now, okay, so let's move on. So if we talk about that, what about sporting achievement of the year? I'm going to kick off with you, Ross, on this one. Sporting achievement of the year. This was the hardest one for me, to be honest, of all the categories.
Yeah, I mean, I try actually not comment too much on cycling, but it's difficult to overlook a guy who won 3 monuments, came second in 3 every monument he did, podiumed. Plus, he won the Grand Tour that he prioritised, which was the Tour de France, the only one he raced in. It's difficult to look past that. And as I said earlier, when we talk about Newsmaker, it must be the most dominant cycling season we've ever seen. And that came after the most dominant cycling we'd ever seen in 2024. It's crazy. So that's probably it. But if I was trying to play devil's advocate, I'd stay in the same sport, and I would say that this was the year that we did in fact see a double on the cobbles of Roubaix and a Tour de France win, and it went to Pauline Ferrand-Prévot. So if I wanted to be disruptive to my own pick, I'd go with Prévot, not Pogacar.
Yeah, I think that's a great call, to be honest. I think Prévot, the way that she planned that Tour de France victory, I thought was absolutely clinical and exciting. And the fact that you had to wait literally to those last 2 stages to figure out whether she's even a contender, and then suddenly she was there. But I thought it was absolutely brilliant from her. And she's not only is she, I mean, is it fair to say, Ross, that she's the Eddie Merckx of cycling? Maybe the Mathieu van der Poel of cycling. I mean, is she the dominant female cyclist ever?
It's got to be.
She's won the Epic, the Cape Epic. She's won mountain biking. She's won cyclocross. Now she's won Tour de France. I mean, there's nothing she hasn't won in any sphere of cycling.
I think that list is her and Marianne Vos, because then the problem for Vos is that the Tour de France and the Grand Tour growth in women's cycling came too late for her to really. Because I think she's at the back end of it now, right? But in terms of wins, she's got more than anyone alive. And she's won, and so is Ferrand-Prévot, right? Like cyclocross, road. So they've dominated every discipline. But I think Vos has won more races, which is fair enough because she had the sprint, so she was always going to do that. But I'd say you're right. There's two names on that list, and it's the 2 of them.
The 2 of them, yeah.
Was it the mountain bike she won in the Olympics last year?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, it was mountain bike. Yeah, that's pretty incredible when you think about it, to go from winning the Olympic gold in the mountain bike last year to Paris-Roubaix to the to the Tour de France.
In fact, the more
That's,
we're talking about
that's
it, the more
exceptional.
I'm growing with my pick here, because the achievement is not winning Roubaix in the Tour; it's winning the Olympics and then transforming yourself back into a road cyclist, which she had been before. It's not like she was new to the road,
Yeah.
but to transform yourself back to a road cyclist, win on the classics, and then target that specific stage in the Tour de France. There was much talk, and we even spoke about it last week, about how she went about preparing for that Col de la Madeleine stage and the weight loss and the focus on power to weight, and then delivering that. It's actually, when you look at the whole body of work, that's actually quite an incredible achievement.
Yeah, and I think the one argument you mentioned that Marianne Vos is unlucky in the fact that we're not seeing the back in her day when she was in her best. We didn't see the Tour de France where it is now. But I would also argue in a counterweight to that to suggest that it's more competitive now than it was back then. So there is way more focus on women's cycling now. There's way more focus on performance, and I think there's way more contenders in women's cycling than there was when Marianne Vos was at her very best. I mean,
Yeah.
she's not far off her very best now, even. But I think that's Provon Prevost is basically winning at a time when women's cycling is at an absolute high, and there are lots of contenders out there. So
Yeah, and
that's a good thing.
no, you're right. And will she win again next year? You wouldn't bet on her. You'd rather bet on the field, which is healthy for the women's sport. Men's cycling, you
Yeah,
wouldn't bet against Pogacar. And that, to me, we get to this at the end maybe. When you'd rather bet on one person over the field, the sport is too dominated by one person. Whereas in women's cycling, you
yeah,
wouldn't. You'd say any one of five could win that Tour de France next year. I think it's really good. But back to Voss, like, if the Tour had been around for a decade before it eventually got relaunched as the one we have now, she would have probably worn a dozen yellow jerseys, maybe not won it overall because of the mountains, but she would have won countless green jerseys, sprint titles, maybe
yeah,
even a kingdom. Who knows? So she did lose out a little bit on the trophy cabinet, jersey cabinet, as it were. But
yeah,
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 Ferran Perot for me.
yeah. Gareth, please tell us that you've decided on your sporting achievement of the year as one of the ones that we've chosen, or is it something completely different?
Something completely different. Um, I mean, Eric also picked Prevost for her double on Discourse. And I'm going to go against Discourse's wishes here because they actually had Simon Yates winning the Giro. There was a few of them there. Dr. Stu, Leon, and David all chose him. I'm actually going to go Sporting Achievement of the Year with Killian Hornet, or Hornet.
Oh no,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, for his States of Elevation project. I think it was
Nice.
Karina that picked this one. He basically over 31 days, he successfully summited all 72 peaks above 14,000 feet in the US, running up and down them and cycling between them. Did entirely on foot and bike. He was, I think, 5,145 kilometers, 123,000 feet of elevation gain, all, like I say, in 31 days. It was a hell of a project. And this after he came third in Western States earlier in the year, if you remember that race where David Roach was in it. So from an ultra running perspective, I think just endurance perspective, I think that's just an outstanding achievement.
So
So
just take us through it again. So where did he run to and from again? Just to
there
kind
were
of
72 peaks above 14,000 feet, the
right,
14,000ers in the US. And he linked them up on foot and bike over a continuous sustained push. Like not like multi-leg, he just kept going for 31 days. Um,
right.
so it was in September, between September the 3rd to October the 4th.
So
Um,
he rode between the peaks and then ran up the
and
peaks
then
and
ran
then
up and
came.
yeah, basically just
Okay.
one long effort, which is it's quite outstanding. And since then we've seen various papers on the physiology of it. It was quite an incredible achievement, as I say. So for that, and I know it's not like a popular sport in a way; it's a niche sport, ultra running. But when you see an achievement like this from, I think, and we hate to bandy around the term GOAT, don't we? But I think Killian really is one of the greatest of all time for all the hard rock wins, the Western State wins, Sierra Zianal. It's just one of those
Yeah.
achievements I think that just needs to be put out there more. A little bit like Verstappen as newsmaker of the year. It's a little bit left field, but I think it works.
I think it
Yeah.
works well.
I think the only thing that I always feel a bit tentative about and always makes me a little bit sad because even as you describe that achievement there's a side to me that, like, you look at a Kylian Jornet and you think he's the greatest trail runner that's ever lived potentially. Can't he just stick to that? In other words, doing all these sort of, I find them slightly gimmicky ideas. Like how many times can you run around a goat in 24 hours? Like everybody can come up with a different way of doing something, and it's extraordinary what he did for sure. But I almost want to see him as somebody who is like he's won the big events. That's what we should remember him for. That's what he should be known for. Less of the gimmicky type events, which are extraordinary, but also less focused.
How is it
Uh,
gimmicky? How is
because nobody else has done that. So we don't know how good that is until somebody else has done it.
I can
You
tell
know
you
what I
how good
mean?
it is. He just did 72
Yeah, but
14,000
I
feet
know
in a
what you
row,
Absolutely.
mean.
cycle between them.
I know what Mike means, and I sort of I can see I agree. It's not it's gimmicky in the sense that it's like self-created and at this stage like non-competitive.
Yeah.
It's still remarkable, but
Right.
it's non-competitive, like, Mike and I, we're certainly, I think I'm speaking for you now, but I'm from the school of thought that, like, I want to see competitive, like, a guy who runs 100 marathons in 100 days is worth very little to me compared to the guy who wins the London Marathon.
Yeah.
Like, I'll take one
I'm
win.
expecting pushback from discourse on this one. I'll be interested to see the
No,
reactions
but
because
what's
I'll
the
be asking for
pushback? Like,
specific reactions to this choice.
no, but the pushback shouldn't be that it's not remarkable and amazing and it's an incredible achievement, because that's not in
Yeah.
question. Like, it's,
But
you
this
know,
is Sporting Achievement of the Year.
yeah, and that's, I think we're
Yeah.
saying it's a great achievement.
But
I, I,
you think the sport needs competition to be sport, or
I think it needs to be verified and a credible. I mean, as I say, we're towing a very tight line here because, as Ross has said, is that it is remarkable what he did. There's always a side to me that anybody that was great at something, that once they go off their competitive streak, in other words, once they go to something that's slightly gimmicky, I would rather that they were, I want to see Killian win 4 UTMBs and 5 Western States against the very best trail runners in the world. Then everybody say, that guy
but
was the go-to trail running of all time. Nobody's going to touch him. He wasn't the guy that went across America on a bike and ran up mountains. I want him to be known for what he was really good at rather than the gimmicky stuff he did in between. I think it's the only way I can explain it, really.
I
but he's known
remember,
for all of it. He
yeah,
just got bored of winning races,
yeah. I remember working with Lewis Pugh, who was a South African-based cold water swimmer guy, and his whole spiel or shtick was to go swim in the Arctic Circle, and I think eventually it became an environmental climate change thing because he was saying, look how crazy this is. I can swim at 90 degrees north. That's because of the melting of the ice caps. It didn't start out that way, but it became that. And I remember, like, because we did all the testing on him and the training and measuring his physiology and trying to adapt him to cold water. And it was all the stuff about what a remarkable physiology he had and how was he doing all this stuff. And I was just so underwhelmed by it all. I was like, okay, now let's race there. Let's race. Let's put 20 guys in the Arctic Circle and see who's the best. That's what I want to know. Because all you've done is
Yeah.
do it. Like, it's interesting, impressive physiology. And Jornay's is way better than this. I want to draw parallels between them. But, like, I could take 50 people and I guarantee 40 of them would be able to swim in the Arctic Circle if we just adapted them well enough. Now, I'm not saying that there's 40 people out there that can do what Jornay does. I think he is unique in the world. And that's why I don't disagree with, like, giving him this achievement, because he's an astonishing physiological specimen and athlete, unbelievable stuff. But I think that's the point. Like, is you can always find something no one's done. But when you can find something everyone's trying to do and be the best at it, that's worth more to me.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give you that, but I agree to disagree then.
Well,
Well, I don't
talking
know.
of that,
Yeah,
so my
yeah.
sporting achievement is the opposite end of that then, because it isn't a very established setup. And I gave my sporting achievement of the year to the South African test winning team that won the World Test Championships against Australia when they beat them at Lords by 5 wickets. And the reason why I did that is because South Africa, as a cricketing nation, have been known as the chokers when it comes to that final sort of make or break match that gives them a title. And in the end, they won it, and they won it against a team that was, pretty competitive at the time. And we saw Timber Bavuma, who was struggling with hamstring problems. He managed to grit out 66 in the second innings and Kagiso Rabada, the fast bowler, took 9 for 110 over the course of the match. So it was an extraordinary performance. And then the Aidan Markram, who was the player of the match, he had a match-winning century of 136. And I think as an overall achievement from a South African perspective, that was an achievement in the space of global Test cricket against the very where they'd qualified to be in this World Test Championships, basically shrugged off this mantle of being chokers at the last minute and won this World Test Championships. I think from a purely South African perspective, where there's so much focus on the Springboks at the moment, I think this is a chance for the Proteas, the cricketing team as they're known here in South Africa, to kind of be at the fore of achievement, always rather than being the sort of backroom boys of sporting achievement in South Africa, which they've often been seen as. So that would be my take.
Yeah, it's a nice take. I like that one. The one thing I would say is I'd like to see more than a one-off test for that championship final. No, knock on
Yeah,
obviously of South Africa, but it would be nice to see at least 3 tests, so you had a bit of a run at it.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I
yeah.
mean,
I agree with that 100%.
even our schedule leading into
It'd
that, the
be,
way we qualified was a whole bunch of 2-match test series. Just make it 3. Like I'm so like
yeah,
it's just but the problem in the Test cricket calendar is it's been so compressed by the demand for 2020 tournaments that they've really sacrificed the integrity of Test cricket to create this situation. So I find it quite difficult
yeah,
to watch any
yeah,
cricket at all now. Just really put off by
yeah,
the way that it's been so lopsided towards one format and then one or two countries. It was great stuff to see different countries disrupt that hierarchy, the Indian Australian one, because we qualified for that match at the expense of India, right? That was funny to begin with,
yeah,
because they wanted that game. They want India and Australia at Lords, and so we denied
yeah.
them that, and I was pleased by that. And then obviously to beat them was even better.
Yeah, yeah. And there was some controversy. I mean, there was a couple of players who said they didn't believe in the format of the World Test Championship rankings and how that point system worked. And there was obviously been some debate about that. But nevertheless, from a perspective of just achievement and where they come from, I think it was a wonderful, wonderful performance from South Africa. So, but maybe somewhat for me a homegrown support rather than a global achievement. I think you had to look at this, and I looked at this and thought if I was English, would I say the same thing? I still think if you were a cricket fan, you would still say that was a remarkable achievement from South Africa. The next one is a slightly more negative view, and this is going to be something that I think we're going to have some fun talking about: the sporting failure of the year. So, Gareth, I'm going to let you kick off this one first so that we can hopefully disagree with you. Because so far, if I'm right in saying, we have got no consensus on any of the divisions we've had so far. Are we 100% non-consensual on all of the things so far?
So far, I don't think we're going to argue about these. I mean, you could pick one of 5 of disasters of the year,
Yeah,
really.
but you got to figure out what it
I
is. So,
know, but
Gareth, you kick off stuff with your one.
can I choose 2 from
You can choose
athletics?
two.
I
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to
yeah.
choose 2 because I want to choose Grand Slam track because we've already mentioned that one because that turned
Yeah.
out to be an absolute disaster.
Or maybe just
And
give some background to those of the listeners who don't know what the Grand Slam track was. Just give us some background as to what it was supposed to
well,
be and how it sort of was mooted and fated.
it was like Michael Johnson standing like Christ Redeemer over the whole of athletics, claiming that he could only save track. He couldn't save track and field. So he organized his own series of events, inviting the mercenaries of world athletics to run on the track for money against some unknowns. And after a sparsely, I think it was Jamaica it's kicked off, wasn't it? It was kind of like sparsely populated and not very well televised. And then it moved on to, and now I'm going to be struggling. I think it was Florida next, Miami. And then it started to peter out, didn't it? It got to
Mm.
perhaps Philadelphia, I'm guessing now from
Yeah.
memory. And it never made the 4th leg of its journey because it just lost momentum along the way. The racing was pretty poor. It didn't have all the stars, and now it's finally ended in bankruptcy, as we were talking about earlier on, with the Grand Slam track and Johnson owing $13 million to its creditors. It was really an abject failure from start to finish. I don't know if it was just ill-conceived, ill-timed, or it just had no substance behind it. And it goes to show that you can't have track without field. So really, it was my disaster of the year. And it would have been nice to see something succeed. But on the other hand, I think we've discussed many times, and I know, Mike, you've talked about it before. Does athletics need saving? And I think the answer is I don't actually think it does. I think it's had a cracking year without Grand Slam track. And I think this just really detracted from it.
Yeah, Ross, I mean, I look at it and I think about how much I've read about it. I think there was obviously a marketing issue around that. I don't know whether field events necessarily attract people more than track does. I think track's still the sort of main attraction at track and field events.
But
But I would suggest that yes, competitiveness is key. And I think the sadness is that if the enhanced games go ahead and Grand Slam track doesn't, it's a bit of it's a poor reflection on society if that happens. But I also think that sometimes there's a level of arrogance to suggest that you can now change something that is traditionally brought in. And how do you make track and field more exciting? I still don't think he made it particularly exciting from a purely track and field perspective. Ross, what are your memories of it and your thoughts on that
Yeah,
track event?
couple things. One is I reckon the only thing Johnson will be glad about now is that he didn't have field events, because if he did, he'd have to pay even more people money. So he's probably thanking his lucky stars. Because the thing about it is, like, the field events do add to the spectacle of track and field. But if you're running Grand Slam track and your only way to get Duplantis and other pole, because you can't just have Duplantis. Well, maybe that's the one time you could, but you can't just have Mahuchik in the high jump. You got to get Mahuchik and Ola Slagers, so that you've got a competition. Otherwise, it's a test. It's an exhibition. And the same thing for shot put. You got to get the top three guys. You can't get one. So he would have had to pay a lot more people, and whatever extra eyeballs and sponsorships you could sell against field events wouldn't have paid. It wouldn't have washed its face, basically. So he would have had a bigger loss with field events. But the second point is the whole. I think you got to say, well, what was Johnson trying to solve? And the main premise of Grand Slam track was that track and field spectators, track spectators in this case, didn't see the stars often enough. And so Johnson's format was that you'd get Sydney McLaughlin to run 100-meter hurdles and a 400 hurdles, or a 200 and a 400. So you'd see her twice. You'd see Carl Hocker run an 800 and a 1500, or a 15 and a 5. So that sounds sensible, right? Like, that's actually, in principle, a good addition. But instead of creating a whole new track competition to do that, we should have rather said, how can we get that concept into the existing structure that is already quite strong and established? So it just seemed to me that he tried to reinvent something. He tried to reinvent a wheel where all he was doing was changing the spokes.
Yeah.
yeah, it's like the field events. You need them. It's like trying to bake a cake without flour. You can put all the really nice ingredients in, but it just ends up as a pile of nice ingredients on the bottom of a baking tray without anything to bind them together. And that, with the television, that's what the field events do.
Yeah.
They bind together the whole thing.
Yeah, when you watched Grand Slam track on television and then you watch Diamond League, the biggest difference in quality is the fact that between track races in a Diamond League event, you can cut to field events for 3 or 4 minutes. Now, sometimes it gets annoying because they'll cut and show me 3 long jump performances at the 3,000 meter mark of a 5K. And I don't want to see this now. I want to see this at the end of the race. So we get annoyed. But in general, the field event coverage enhances the product on TV. It doesn't detract from it. I get live, they haven't figured out how to make the field events relatable, because you're watching a guy do triple jump and he's literally 90 meters away from you. But that's why the field event problem, where there is a problem, can be solved by having those in intimate settings. We spoke with Sean Ingle on the podcast this year. We spoke with Malcolm Gladwell on the podcast. Those pole vault competitions in train stations and shot put in town squares, those are wonderful for sport, and they really need to do more of that. But overall, athletics is in good shape.
Well, like they did the Weltklasse this year.
Exactly like that, and they've done for some time.
Like they did the Weltklasse this year, where they had to split. Yeah, I mean, I think it was amazing. You had so many big crowds watching the field events on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday you had the track events, which I thought was a brilliant concept.
Yeah, and it works because you can record what was done in the train station, the town square, and you can still play it into the TV broadcast. So then you're winning on both sides. You're getting the live experience for a small number of fans in an intimate setting, and you get the television broadcast where you can play it in. And I think it makes the sport more relatable as well when you can see a pole vault performance from 10 meters away rather than 100 meters away, which some of them were watching it from. If you were at the back of the top home straight and the pole vault was at the start line, you weren't seeing Duplantis. So anyway, the point is Johnson came on this sort of chariot to save the sport, and it's failed massively. And it's astonishing to think, like, what were they? I don't know enough about business, but what were they thinking that they were running up these creditors worth 14 million? You said, Gareth, $13 million.
Where was $13 million?
Where was that going to come from? You didn't just miss it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it's. I had a different failure of the year, but I'd have to say that I'm consensual in terms of your choice there. I actually had the crowds at the Ryder Cup as being the sporting failure of the year, purely because I think the way they behaved was a real mark against golf and particularly against American spectators. But I'd have to say that the track, Gareth, yours one, I would actually agree with you on that one.
Those
Ross, do you
spectators
have
added to the spectacle.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the irony is that your biggest failure created the best moment.
Yes, but it left a very bad taste. I mean, you saw beer cans being thrown at Rory McIlroy's wife, and him being sworn at, him swearing at spectators. You don't want to see that in sport, really. As much as it's great to watch and it's great for TikTok and all the social media to see that, I just don't think you want to see that in sport, because what it does is it sends the wrong message to youngsters who are participating in these sports to think or not even participating. People are going to the games. If they think this is the way to treat sports people, it might flow out from golf to other sports where you can swear and throw beer cans at people and that sort of thing, and it becomes. I just think it left a very sour taste in my mouth, that situation.
I mean, and obviously,
as I say, I don't think it is even close to yours, Gareth.
When you have like proximity issues, and golf creates that, and I'd say cycling creates that. Track and field might create that if they do more shot puts and pole vaults in train stations. Yeah. But like when you've got that close proximity, then of course...
Well, nobody's going to heckle a shot putter because you don't want to be on the wrong side of a shot putter.
Good point.
I won't be heckling any shot putters anytime soon.
If you did, that would
maybe
be a massive...
10,000 meter runners. I'll be happy to take them on.
There'd be a massive failure on your part if you did that. So like cycling, and we've seen it in the past, right? Remember urine getting thrown at people, cyclocross, Van der Poel cycles past and someone chucks a beer at him. Was it this year that someone threw a cap into his spokes or a beer?
Yeah, that was on one of the... yeah.
In Paris-Roubaix, someone threw a bottle or a can into his face, and he said it hit him on the head, and it was actually pretty... You can imagine you're going 50k an hour and you wallop something, even if it's stationary, it's going to hurt. So those are obviously really bad, but it's just interesting to wonder whether that Ryder Cup spectacle would have been what it was without that. Like, I mean, I remember the best live sport I ever watched. They whip up the
crowds, don't they?
Yeah, the best live sport I ever watched was the quarterfinal of the Men's Rugby World Cup in 2023 when South Africa played France in Paris. And they scored early, and then there was a knockdown by Eben Etzebeth. French fans and non-South African fans would say knock on. We say knock down here. And I've never felt hostility like in that stadium. It was the most incredibly intense, it wasn't violent, but it was psychologically violent atmosphere towards the ref, towards the Springboks. And that's why it was memorable. But obviously no one did anything. They only expressed unhappy. So that's the difference, right?
Yeah.
But you need...
It's bullying.
And that's the fine line that sport walks. It's like the reason English Premier football is so successful is because... there is so much quote-unquote tribalism between teams, and you get the home fans. They dislike one another. Real Madrid-Barcelona is a rivalry because there's genuine animosity. So sports always walking that fine line of trying to foster rivalries without creating open hostilities. It's a tricky one, interesting one.
I think Mike's right though. They went over the line.
Oh yeah, there's no. I'm not defending. I'm saying they clearly went over the line. It's just interesting that you want. When Europe hosts the US in 2 years' time, they want a hostile environment, but they don't want that one. And how do you find that balance? That's an interesting one. Anyway.
Be interested to see if there is a reaction when it plays in Europe.
I think the
European crowds go, well, you did this, we're going to do that.
I think the European crowds
We will
be,
rise
do with
above.
more class.
the European crowds will be decently hostile, I think. Whereas the American crowds
Yes.
were
I like. Yeah.
indecently hostile. That's what they were. They were just indecently boorishly hostile.
I think we should include that as one of our contributions to global sports discussion and suggest that decently hostile becomes a term to describe what good crowd behavior is about.
Yeah, we
So
can.
I'm going to make a note of that, and we're going to add that to the lexicon of sporting fans around the world.
We'll work on a definition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, we've got one already. I think we've got a good one. It's not what happened at the Ryder Cup.
Yes.
What
Ross,
was
what
yours,
is-
Ross?
Yeah, what is yours, Ross?
My sporting failure there, sports science.
Yeah. Sports science.
Sports science.
Well, all of it.
All of it. No, not all of it.
Taking one to the chest there, Ross.
Not all of it. Not all of it. But so two reasons. One is, and I'm saying it sort of partly so that I can link in a podcast that we did this year, which was the failure of sports science to replicate. I think you called it, Mike, in the title, Sports Science's Replication Crisis. And it was in the first half of the year, and we had a guest on, Dr. Joe Warren, who's been a guest on before, and he'd undertaken this massive study to try and reproduce scientific studies from the field of sports science. Now, very briefly, replication is a fundamental principle of science, because you will do an experiment and you will come up with your answers, your conclusions, but in order for that to become truth, it has to be repeated or replicated by someone else. So if I do something in South Africa and then someone does it in Spain and the United States and Australia, they need to be able to get the same result so that they can confirm what I've found. If you don't get that, then it's not replicable and it's not science. And what Joe Warren found is that sports science falls way, way, way short of where it should be with respect to replication. And that was actually one of our big podcasts of the year. So that's the first reason for sports science making my failure of the year. The second reason is because I get stuff on social media, whether it's Twitter, but mostly Instagram, and it's all sports performance and health advice, and it is such crap. Like the stuff I see on how much protein do you need. There's a podcast we have to do. Weight loss issues in performance and in health. Supplements. Zone 2 training. And we tackled some of this. But let's broadly categorize it under the banner of bro science. And by the way, we did a podcast on that. We're like the Simpsons, where there's an episode for everything. You know that thing that Simpsons did it. we did bro science. We did sports science as failures. But the social media, if social media died overnight, the world would be way better off from a sports science and health point of view, because there's so much more slop and garbage than there is good stuff. It's unbelievable. It grinds my gears when I get these. Here's what I eat in a day, and you should do this too. And it's like nobody basically giving sports science, and I'm not even going to call it medical because it's so far short of that bar. But it doesn't even clear the credible sports science bar. And the reason
That's
that
not the failure of sports science.
No, the reason sports science has failed is because people like me, we should be in that space, but we're not, because sports scientists don't communicate what they know well enough, and so it leaves a gap for bullshitters and con artists and exploiters and chancers to fill that gap, and that's the problem. And there's a sports science pod on this. When Malcolm Gladwell spoke to us, he introduced the concept of people are experience rich, theory poor. The people who are theory rich are the ones who should be propagating those theories and truths into the world, but they don't. And so instead, the people who are experience rich try and do it instead. And so many of them do it badly. Not all, but so many of them do it badly. And so it's a failure of sports science because we fail to own our own communication.
Yeah. I mean,
What's the solution then, do you think? Do you think there's a way of having a central body that pushes? I mean, you do have scientific journals. Do you think those scientific journals can change the way they do things to make what they're producing there more accessible to the public, so there's a better understanding of scientific papers and research?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, sports science has got to get its research act in order so that it becomes more credible and robust. So the first part of my failure of sports science is the replication part and the integrity. You can't do a study on the effects of caffeine or creatine. Oh, that's the other one I saw. There was a period of about a month, 6 weeks earlier this year where I was getting fed all this junk on creatine because 2 or 3 people had done the podcast circuit and they've been advocating for how you need creatine to solve every problem from concussion to menopause. It's crazy. Then you look it up. You say, what's the research on this? And there's some crappy study on 8 people. Like, that's not good research, you know. So Joe Warren spoke about all that stuff. So number one is like, let's get better sports science. But number two is, you're right. And it's interesting. Some scientific journals have started making you, when you submit, I've had to do this a few times, you've actually got to submit with your scientific paper a tweet and a basic level infographic that can be shared through social media that summarizes your study. So they've recognized this and tried to understand it. But it shouldn't be the journal. It should be the researchers themselves. Like, if I'm studying something I believe is valuable, and by the way, if you're not studying something you believe is valuable, what are you doing? Like, of course, you believe it, right? So whether that's zone 2 training or creatine, whatever, you studied it because you think it's going to make a contribution to people. Don't outsource the communication of that to someone else. Do it yourself. Like, work with someone to make a basic infographic. Get on Instagram yourself. And yeah, you might think you're adding noise, but you're trying to add clarity to noise. More people need to do that individually.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to mention that is because one of the topics we've got is the favorite scientific study of the year. And I didn't actually have one as such, apart from Joe Warren's replication one. But really, I was going to say that any scientific study that includes, like you say, infographics, or makes it easy for the layman to understand the principles behind it. I think Jem Arnold's good at doing this. Is it Jem Arnold who's released papers? But on Twitter, then you get a thread, and he explains it in easy to understand language. And you've got to remember, as sports scientists, that the people you're preaching to, or not preaching, you're trying to explain things to, need to understand in easy to understand language, because we don't understand a lot of the jargon that's going on. So anybody who's doing that, yeah, I think that works. But you're going to be fighting a losing battle, fighting influencers online, I think, because misinformation spreads a lot faster than decent information, because it's clickbait, isn't it? I mean, what was it Terry Pratchett said? Is it a lie can run around the world before the truth can even get its boots on?
Yeah.
You know, it's very difficult. You're in a very difficult position, I think.
Yeah, of course. And so
I would argue, and so Ross, I would say that I would slightly disagree with you in terms of the fact that the individual people in the space are the ones responsible for disseminating the right kind of information. Because the reason why it's obviously a hot topic for me working in the media business is that for us as a brand, as Runners World and Bicycling here in South Africa, and as global brands that are available around the world, the key part of our content is credibility. And I think it's up to the publications, like, you know, the many journals that are out there, to make sure that they are pushing the fact that they are the most credible resources. They've done the vetting, and therefore they need to get their social media act together to make sure that their stuff is pushed as much as possible. And I think that as much as you know, as much as individuals are responsible for doing themselves, people will look towards the most credible sources to confirm something credibility. So if I'm looking at some research, I want to go to one of those credible sources and say, let me check the BJSM and to see whether they've done anything on this, and therefore I can then hopefully trust what they say, although there was some controversy around that itself. But that I think that's more important, that the credibility of publications in the space is more important than the individuals.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Like, so if I publish something...
No, but the responsibility lies with those publications more than it does with the individual. Maybe I should phrase it like that.
If I publish something in the British... And I'm not going to publish in the British Journal of Sports and Medicine. That's the journal that doesn't know what a woman is. Let's say I publish something in the International Journal of Sports Performance and Physiology. And
yes, it was a good one.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. They publish a lot of good stuff on training methods, zone 2 versus... or high-intensity intervals, that sort of stuff. You know, you get the idea. It's their problem to take my paper and communicate it, and I would hope that they've got a good social media presence. In general, they don't perform like a Kardashian Instagram account does. I use that word as an umbrella term. But why would I outsource it only to them? I've also got to be on the front foot myself. You know, why not? Like, the barrier to entry on social media is so low. Like, get out there and actually say, I did this. It's credible because it's in a journal. And I want to tell you about it. You know who's been... Like, so for example, you mentioned Jem Arnold, who's done a little bit. There was a guy called Jan Lemieux used to make these infographics summarizing studies. Asker Jurkendrup's got a website where he tries to do it. There's an Instagram account I follow called Knowledge is What, which I think is some sort of non-first language English-speaking person's pun. But they do a really cool job of like taking cycling research and turning it into a single Instagram page summary. I don't know if you've seen this, and they'll talk about a latest study on carbs, 120 versus 60 grams an hour, and it's a cool resource. Like I just think, because the problem is Gareth's right. Like you can't compete with him, but then is the only solution to give up and say I'm going to do nothing, or is it to do a little bit and hope?
No, but you can't. You see, you can. I don't believe that's true. I think you can compete with him, because I think if you're like, for instance, the creatine example that you gave there, a respected journal should have a team that's on hand to say that piece of information that's gone out about creatine is based on a study of 8 individuals, therefore has an issue around credibility, and should be able to highlight that. And a good team can do that, and a good team can compete with that to debunk some of the stuff that's going out there. So it is a war for sure. I mean, we see it in running and cycling every single day. I get lots of misinformation about running and cycling. Everybody's got an opinion, but for us as a brand and for anybody in a credible space, they need to be able to say that that is scientifically and research wise wrong. So I don't agree that you can't compete. I actually think you can if you have the right team involved on the right publication, which is kind of what I'm saying. I'm not saying that the individual is not responsible to push out their own research, but the publications that are regarded and credible need to up their game in terms of communicating the right information.
There's no doubt they do. I just, again, and the other name I forgot to mention on my list there, there's Stuart Phillips, who's been on this show. He goes by @McInprof on Instagram and Twitter. He's fighting this battle against these protein guys, because he's going on every podcast and saying, what you are hearing from the pseudo experts on protein is not true. Let me tell you the evidence. And he's immensely credible. He's really good at explaining it. And he gets, if I could give an award for like, I don't know what do you want to call it, like sports science crusader of the year, that he would get it, because he's trying so hard to debunk all these protein myths. But like Gareth says, there's 5 people going on podcasts telling you exactly how much you need, and he's got to put out 5 fires every week. So it's just,
but he's doing it.
He's trying his best.
The public inherently want the quickest solution and the simplest solution.
Yeah.
And so anybody who provides that over a nuanced and slightly complicated one is going to be the winner. So it's difficult, but I agree with you, and I know where you're coming from now. And as you said, sports science.
Yeah.
But if you don't fight, if you don't get it, if you don't keep trying, get the message across, and we do that. I think we do that really well.
Yeah, that's why everyone listening to this should pledge to become a supporter, and then you will see. Anyway, we said no backslapping. I stuck a knife in the front. So I got to give at least one slap on the back. So let's
park it. Exactly. It's a good point.
Yeah.
All right. Next category. Favorite scientific study. It kind of follows on nicely what we're talking about now. My favorite scientific study of the year was titled "Much Ado About Zone 2: A Narrative Review Assessing the Efficacy of Zone 2 Training for Improving Mitochondrial Capacity and Cardiorespiratory Fitness in the General Population." So it was a nice tight title, something you could easily get your head around. But basically, this is a podcast that we did earlier this year in August, and it was around the fact that there is so much misinformation about Zone 2. And actually, when you look at training and you look at all the research out there, there is no doubt that you're going to get more bang if you don't have a lot of training time. Getting high intensity is going to be better than long, slow distance all the time. And I don't want to go into the details of that podcast, because we would be here for another hour and a half. But we'll put that podcast in the show notes. But have a look in August this year. There's a whole thing about rethinking about Zone 2. That for me was extremely enlightening in an area which I felt I knew a fair amount about. And I learned so much in that podcast that it changed my mind about the way that I train pretty much every day.
I'm reaching through the screen.
So that was my scientific study of the year.
I'm reaching through the screen to
high
five you, because we actually agree. That's the first time we've had independent agreement. So the only difference is...
So you've chosen the same one?
Exactly. The only difference is I was going to introduce it by reading to you that it was from Christy Storachuk et al. And the senior author on that paper was Brendan J. Gerd, who was a guest on this podcast when we spoke about it. And it triggered... arguably in the 6 years I think we are now, or is it we in season 7 or 6, Mike? Whatever it is. In that
7,
150 plus whatever podcasts, this was the one that I think triggered the most polarized response, other than maybe the transgender stuff, which is polarized for a different reason. And it was interesting, like it went on YouTube and there were some really like hostile comments about it, voice notes that I got from even pro cyclists about it and so on, because, and it was at the time like a, wouldn't say uncomfortable one, but it was like a Mythbuster podcast, which does make me a little uncomfortable because I find the concept of mythbusting a little bit unnecessarily sensationalized. But we were kind of trying to puncture what was being communicated about Zone 2 with that podcast. You remember, like we were trying to say, hang on a moment, here's a podcast where they'll tell you Zone 2 is the best way to drive mitochondrial adaptations. Zone 2 is the best type of training if you want to develop an aerobic base and so forth. And it's not. It's simply factually not. Per minute, per hour, it is inferior to training at Zone 3 and Zone 4. That's a fact. So when Inigo San Milan or Peter Attia or whatever say Zone 2 is the best and you should do more of it, that's not entirely the case. But unfortunately, I think, and I'll take some responsibility for it, is we didn't carve out the context in that podcast clearly enough for people to understand exactly what we were saying, and it came across as you should replace Zone 2 with Zone 3 and 4, which is not always true. So it was a difficult one to get accurate on the communication. But that part of it, definitely the case. And in my mind, the reason it was so interesting is because it flips the way you think about how you allocate your hours to training. And one of the things about it is the very best athletes in the world, they're already maxed out or ceilinged or saturated for the higher intensity training. Because when you're doing 20 to 25 hours a week on the bike or running 180 Ks, even if an hour or two of that is in Zone 3s and 4s, that absolute time of high intensity training is as much as you can get away with. So then they fill it downwards. They don't fill it from Zone 2 first and then stack on a little bit of high intensity. They're saturating the high intensity stuff, and then everything else becomes Zone 2. And Zone 2 becomes immensely important to create overall volume and overall training load and maybe certain other physiological adaptations. But to take that and tell people that they must do Zone 2 because it's the best for something is just false. And I don't know whether we landed that message exactly the way we should have at the time. Gareth saw all the comments of our listeners over on Discourse, and it was a difficult one to communicate.
It was one of those ones we had to do a follow-up, didn't we, on a spotlight to actually to look back at the comments on it, because I was just looking at the thread here. There were 174 posts on that podcast, by far the most that we've ever had, I think, following a podcast.
Yeah.
Because and a lot of it was pushback, because I think the podcast, a lot of it was about specific mitochondrial adaptation. And it was how the podcast was then aimed at a general population. And I think that the message got a little bit mixed there, and there was a little bit of confusion about that. But on the other hand, it got the debate, it got a debate going about it, if nothing else. Even if, as you say, it didn't land exactly right, it did the job it was meant to do to get people thinking. Because why should we just accept that Zone 2 or anything is the way to go?
Yeah,
I remember feeling
what was also good about it is that it was called a narrative review, and I didn't understand what that was before we spoke to Brendan Gerd. He talks about what a narrative review is, and it's basically taking all the information that is out there around Zone 2. So they're experts taking on the best information and interpreting it in a paper. And I thought, you can't really argue that if you're looking at the best research in that space, getting a whole bunch of experts to research the research is, you're not going to get away from the fact that it's a fairly credible piece of documentation, which I thought was a key part of this discussion, is that it's extremely credible paper that was released there.
Yeah, and I mean there's things that are factual. Like if you measure, and the way that Gerd and the other author on that is a guy called Martin Jabala, who's one of the giants of exercise science, particularly in that sort of biochemical molecular physiology side, is the way they do it is they'll make people exercise, and then you do muscle biopsies, and you measure the function and the capacity of certain enzymes. You measure certain signaling molecules, because when we exercise and we're trying to gain fitness, cardiovascular performance, whatever you want to call it, we have to switch on a whole bunch of signaling pathways, because the end result, more mitochondria, more capillaries, etc., more greater capacity to use lactate, reduce lactate levels, etc., they are all a consequence of these signaling pathways, and that's what they measure. And I've always found those kinds of studies like incredibly elegant and robust, because if the signal's there, then it's there. If it's not, it didn't work. Like how would you get adaptation without the signal? It was pretty obvious. So I thought it was credible. Maybe not the level of a systematic review, but more narrative version. And I remember at the time that it was released, initially I felt, I don't want to say guilty, but like I felt a little bit concerned at how it had been received and pitched. But then in the discussions over on Discourse, in defending some of the things, I got more and more persuaded that actually what came out of that podcast was actually quite robust. In hindsight, we asked a question of Brendan Gerd, where we were talking about zone 3 and 4 and the higher intensity stuff when you move across, even if you work in a 3 intensity domain, which is like moderate, then intense and severe. Even if you work 3 versus 2, we asked him, why do the elite athletes do so much time in zone 2? So that was maybe the wrong question, because and up to that point, we'd been having a discussion about general fitness and people like us, not people like Van der Poel and Pauline Prevot. But then the other thing is he answered that question saying that at the moment, there's no reason for them to do it. And I think that triggered a lot of people. And maybe in hindsight, he'd take that back. I don't know. Because it changed the conversation from being one on the work that they'd done to being application in elite athletes, which is maybe where it went off the rails a little bit. So I feel we might have done a cleaner job there. But overall, to try and press back against some things. And like the thing I took from it is most people will do their training rides aiming for zone 2 too easy. And they would benefit from pushing a little bit harder, finding 20 minutes in their 8-hour training week to go into zone 3, 4, 5 if they want to use a 5-zone model. Try and push it up a little bit, because I think people got so preoccupied with keep it easy, because easy is the best, that I think most people undertrain. And that's what we wanted to puncture.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gareth, what is your favorite scientific study of the year?
Well, like I said, anything really that is easy to understand with infographics and big bright colors and pictures, because that's how I work in sports science these days. If it's got a big picture of somebody walking or whatever, that's great. So yeah, no, I'm just going to be general on that one. I did enjoy the replication study in the talk with Joe Warren. I thought that was an excellent. I mean, really, we're going over a little bit into the favorite podcast of the year, which I think is going to be the next one. So yeah, I just leave it with big bright pictures and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you say, let's go into that one in our favorite podcast of the year, with avoiding too much backslapping here. Gareth, I'll give you your first dibs at this one.
Well, I'm going to leave that one. I'm going to leave this one definitely to Discourse. Yeah, because I mean, obviously, I enjoy recording them myself. I enjoyed the Tokyo series because, like I said, I got so immersed in it. But if we were going to go with the favorite podcasts for Discourse, they would be the Replication Crisis one we've mentioned, the rowing one with Drew Gin, that got a lot, and one of the recent ones, the Story and Science of Endurance, that you recently did with Ross when you were talking about the Endure book and his studies. For those three stood out for me, and I think for Discourse as well.
Ross, your thoughts on that?
So the Drew Gin one was the most surprising one for me. The fact that but he was such a high caliber guest, so I think we could have spoken to Drew Gin about pretty much anything. In the end, the focus was on rowing, but he explained rowing in a way that I think captured a lot of people who'd never watched it, and so that was testament to how good he was at it. But such an impressive person, and you could tell he had such mastery of the subject that he could take it in any direction. He could explain it with enthusiasm and technical insight. It was fantastic, and I didn't expect that podcast to hit as well as it did, so that was cool. Having Malcolm Gladwell on was a 6-year bucket list thing and a real privilege. I really enjoyed that. I mentioned it earlier, but he gave us the theory, the experience-rich theory poor, and how his job was to bring theory to other people's experiences. I've used that at least half a dozen times since in my work, because I realized like what we're doing in rugby is we're working with coaches and players, and they are experience-rich, and we're trying to bring theory to explain their experience. And so I've used that a great deal. So Gladwell gave me that tool to be able to get doctors and coaches and so on board a little bit better, or to try and understand more. And I just generally, he's such a wonderful storyteller. Like I think that's probably our most listened to podcast this year, actually, if you look at the numbers.
It certainly taught me about how the media works if something goes viral.
Oh,
that was quite the eye-opener.
Yeah,
Wow.
because in the very first 3 minutes, he made that confession that he'd been too afraid to challenge some of the crazy
Cowed.
things on the cowed was his word exactly, on the transgender thing, and then that got picked up on Twitter, and some guy like should know better, but he's a journalist, and he cut out the video clip of it, and he cut out our logo and didn't attribute it at all. That his video on Twitter got 3 million hits, and we got nothing out of it. I was pretty pissed off about that.
But I mean that particular clip got into almost every single major news network in the States, and we saw that going viral. Went all over the Guardian. It was all the major news TV networks in the States as well. I mean, it was that particular clip of his was massively newsworthy. So yeah, it's certainly a lot of people heard about the Science of Sport podcast as a result of that.
Well, did they? Because the guy who cut it in the first place took the logo out and didn't attribute it. So a lot of the time,
but there were
people
lots of other
seeing
ones
it.
that did. So
Yeah. Anyway, it was.
yeah,
I hope we can be at least as influential on one thing in 2026, if not that.
Yeah.
But overall, I'd say that one I enjoyed doing the most was the Central Governor chat, which you called earlier the science of endurance, right? The story of endurance, and and not the science. This was maybe the key point. The reason it was so much
Story,
fun is
yeah.
because we could tell it like it was a story, because it was almost like a trip down memory lane for me on my PhD, and specifically my recollections of Tim and some of the crazy stuff that happened in the course of trying to develop the understanding of fatigue. So I really enjoyed that. Just to storytell was cool.
yeah.
Maybe that links back to what you were saying earlier on about scientists selling themselves, because I think a little bit of personality does go a long way. And if people can identify with you as the author of the paper, or then it does promote the ideas a little better.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ross has been in the trenches. He's been shot a few times, and he's come out the other end and got lots of experience. It's good to hear that perspective for sure.
How about you, Mike?
Yeah, so my favorite podcast is actually favorite podcasts of the year, and all the podcasts that I've chosen, I've had nothing to do with. I've enjoyed what you guys have done on the Spotlight series really, really well. I think it's absolutely amazing for people who are in the news side of what's happening in science of sport and that sort of thing to be able to listen to the Spotlight podcast, because it's something that I can't get my head around, because it requires a lot of dedication to be able to, first of all, see what's happening in the news, to keep an eye on what's happening on discourse. And I think you guys have done an extraordinary job in doing that. And, it's not something that I could do purely because it just requires a lot of reading and a lot of research to make sure those podcasts are really good. The only complaint that we've had internally is that I've often thought a lot of those podcasts could stand alone. Some of the subjects that are there have been so good that they could stand alone as podcasts, and we've certainly got some plans next year to strip some of them out and create their own podcast. But I think to you and to Gareth and Ross, for you guys, in terms of what you've done, there's been absolutely extraordinary this year. And if you're in the sports science space and you want to know what's happening in sports science, make sure you check out the spotlights on our channel, and you'll get a pretty good handle about what's happening in that space every week virtually. I mean, I don't know how many you guys have done, but you've literally done one every single week as far as I can see. But thank you to you guys for doing that.
Yeah, that was the sound of backslapping going on in the background there, if you heard that. And if you got...
Well, yeah, but I wasn't involved in them, so I'm backslapping you guys because I've enjoyed listening to them as a consumer and as a listener rather than as a host, and I've enjoyed them immensely because of that. So, maybe I am backslapping, but I'm backslapping you guys for what you did there. So you don't have to say anything.
No, it's most welcome. I will say that your observation about the detail is true. Like we realize it every single week, because we'll post the spotlight up, and then within a day or two, many of our supporters club members are saying, "But you didn't explore this and that." So I know. So I wanted to ask Gareth, do you feel the pressure when you do these things, and you know that you're not going to cover every single possible angle, because you know there are people out there who are experience rich, and in our case also theory rich, and they will point out where you've missed things.
Yeah, 100%. It's hard. I mean, we do the research. You're thinking this could go so many ways. Just that shoe injury one with the Nike shoes a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
It just shows how many ways we could have gone with it. And of course, one thing we should mention a bit of how the sausage is made, because of the time differences and work commitments and things like that. We're sort of recording it at like 6:30 in the morning over here sometimes. So if I'm not fully compos mentis, there's a reason why. But we do our best, and they are fun to, as long as people understand that we can't cover everything in depth. But hopefully hopefully we can get back. You can pick them up into feature pods then where you two can take it on, because I mean at the end of the day it's you two that really that drive the real sports science behind things.
Yeah, that's certainly
Yeah.
the plan. But I will say I definitely, every podcast, not just the spotlights, I feel pressure to get it 100% right, and that's kind of like going back to like why sports science fails to communicate, is because too many sports scientists do get preoccupied about like, am I going to nail this fully? Exactly right, because you want to cover every possible angle, and you can't, of course. But like I think it's an inhibition that we maybe need to like discard.
Yeah,
Anyway.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, we're going to move. We're going to move on quite quickly. We're going to try and
Yeah.
run through a few of them quite quickly because I think a lot of them we discussed. Gareth, I want to kick you off. Sports team of the year. What is your selection there?
I've kind of got two.
Aha.
But they're both linked in, because I'm going to go for English women's sport, because within the Euros in football, and then the Rugby World Cup victories this year, it was obviously a tremendous year for English women's sport. I mean, we had two polar opposites, because for the women they sort of scraped through, didn't they, on penalties? They had that amazing match against Sweden on penalties, scraped through against Italy, and then penalties in the final against Spain. And then on the other side, we had the England women's rugby team who looked unbeatable, crushing everybody in their path. I think they won by 15 clear points in every game. It was a masterful domination of the event. So yeah, I'm going with English women's sport for a fantastic year there for teams of the year.
Russ, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'll give it to England
Team of the
Rugby
year.
because of the dominance, and not just the dominance in this tournament, but the dominance since the last World Cup. They lost the 2022 final against New Zealand, with playing with 14 women for most of that game because they had a red card fairly early. They didn't lose a game since. So they're on a 33-match winning streak, the most recent of which was that World Cup final. And Gareth mentioned the dominance. Their average margin of victory in the tournament was 44 points. They didn't win a match by fewer than 16. That was the semi-final against France. And that one, if memory serves me, they were 7-5 up at half-time. It was the only instance, and maybe in the pool game against Australia, it took them a while to pull away, but once they did, they hammered them. But they have been so dominant and continued that dominance that it's difficult to look past that. If I were to give honourable mentions, I would have probably said UAE and cycling. And then the Springboks rugby team. The thing that counted against the Springboks rugby team is they really needed to win both matches in New Zealand, not just one. Had they done that, if they'd beaten New Zealand in Auckland and then beaten them in Wellington, which they did the week after, then I would have gone for them probably as the team of the year.
Yeah.
It would be, a lot closer, I think, for the Springboks if they hadn't have had that nasty incident at the end of the very last game with Etzebeth. I thought it's soured a lot of the perception around the Springboks. I know it's only one event, and I'm biased. I think that did. Otherwise, I probably would have gone for them, perhaps.
Yeah. You'll be surprised to hear mine because of somebody who's I've got very little interest in soccer. I thought that we don't do much soccer on this podcast, but I thought that I had a look at some of the soccer achievements this year, and it looked like Paris Saint-Germain, who finally won the European Soccer Champions League crown for the first time, and they defeated Inter Milan. But what's interesting about the story about Paris Saint-Germain is that they've got this massive investment from Qatar Sports Investments. And the idea is that they're going to basically set themselves up as the dominant continental team in Europe. And this is kind of the start of this is the first time that they've kind of shown this, that they want this dominance. So we always talk, when we talk about European football, you always think of the Inter Milans and sort of the Liverpools and the Man Uniteds and that kind of thing. You don't think of Paris Saint-Germain. I certainly don't as a sort of outside looker. But the fact that they won this Champions League crown certainly, I think, puts them into the space where they might become the dominant continental team in Europe over the next few years. They didn't win the inaugural Club World Cup, which was won by Chelsea, which I think was a bit of a disappointment, but they were in the final against them. So again, that shows that they've got good form. So yeah, I think they were. Soccer fans will be pleased to hear that at least we've included one soccer team in our team of the year.
Well, I just included the women's lionesses. And
Yes,
to be
true.
fair, if you've got a bucket load of cash from the Middle East, like UAE in the cycling,
Yes.
then it does make life a lot easier to become team of the year.
That said,
does. So how much-
so interesting thing on Paris Saint-Germain, when they got that Qatari investment, remember the first thing they did was they bought Neymar, they bought Messi, they had Mbappe, and they bought a whole bunch of other guys, and they didn't win it. And they only won it when they got
Yes.
rid of all those guys. So I don't know enough about the technical insights and how they changed the structure and the system and what the coach brought, because I think that's probably massively influential to their success. But the superstars that were paid for by the Qatari money were not the way that they got it in. Now, that's not to say that they're a team of guys on the cheap now. Like, they still must have one of the highest wage bills in the world. But it wasn't the established guys who did it for them. It's just, I thought, pretty interesting, because that investment didn't produce the results straight away. It still took a generation or two, and eventually the removal of those superstars before they won with players who arguably were less individually sensational or high profile than the ones that they eventually won it with.
Yes, I read a piece in researching this podcast around it, where they talked about that particular issue, and they're talking about the value of team dynamics. Is that often if you have all these stars, you become focused around individuals, not around the team concept. And they felt that Paris Saint-Germain had actually changed that concept when the big names are in there. That it was all focused around the big names. And suddenly, when they were removed, they felt like they had to operate as a team, and they've still got some outstanding players, but the team concept had come back. So it shows you that, as much as we think of football as individual stars, that obviously are amazing to watch, the team dynamic is extremely important, and a good team should hopefully beat a team that is just focused on their big stars. Hopefully, maybe that's the lesson that they teach us. Anyway. Sports Person of the Year. Now, this is also an interesting one. I'm going to get Gareth. I'm going to let you kick this one off, actually, because I think this is. I'll be interested to see if we can reach some consensus on this one.
Hank, just to clarify,
I'll
are we
go
doing
with a slightly-
sportsman? Sorry, are we doing sportsman, or because we
Oh,
did
sorry,
women?
Sportsman of the Year. Sorry,
Sportsman of the Year.
I thought we were going to
Sportsman,
roll
yeah.
them into one, roll them all into one. Then are we doing?
We can
sports?
actually. Well, we can do Sportsman of the Year, and we can because I've got separate for Sportsman of the Year. So let's do Sportsman of the Year.
I'm going to go with the discourse sort of consensus here, and I agree as well, because although it might seem a little boring, me and Ross have mocked it a few times, but Duplantis,
Yeah.
what a year! He's broken a world record 4 times this year, but it's just the way he does it. He's just literally untouchable, isn't he? There's nobody coming anywhere close to him. His average performance from his competitions in 2025, 16 competitions, is 6 meters 11. That's all he's needed to do, because only 4 other people have ever gone above 6 meters 11, and that's his average. It's just absolutely incredible. And when you see a sportsman like this, and you can say Pogacar came close as well in the voting, but he's not unbeatable. And it's just, there's no way you can see anybody beating Duplantis. You just can't. So for me, sports person of the year.
Who else is unbeatable in their sport? Any sport, like, because I think Pavel's fairly niche, but like we'll say any sport. Because for Pogacar to be unbeatable is like it's pretty obvious why Pogacar is beatable, because cycling is like 6 sports. You know what I mean? Like, winning Milan San Remo is not the same thing you're doing when you're winning a Tour de France in July. So yes, but I'd argue Pogacar is as unbeatable in a Grand Tour, barring incident, of course. But who else is unbeatable? There's not many unbeatable athletes in their sport.
No, and it's the term we throw around, isn't it? Unbeatable, like, again, the greatest, etc. But Duplantis does seem that extra level again, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at some of the stats here. I was looking at Sergei Bubka. He was obviously the man that held the record for a huge amount of time, and just looking up when that record was broken. So Sergei Bubka's record of 6:15 indoors lasted 21 years, but the outdoor record of 6:14, which was set in 1994, was untouched for 20 years, until it was surpassed in 2014, and then eventually Duplantis broke the outdoor record in 2020. So, I remember the days of Sergei Bubka being around, and people saying, "Well, nobody's ever going to get to that mark." It just seemed an impossible figure to get to. And having covered track and field, in particular pole vault with South Africa's Okkert Brits for many years, where you talked about the vagaries of pole vault. So pole vault, you think, well, are you kind of just go in there, and once you've got your technique sorted out, you can get over. But pole vault is a hugely technical sport, and often people who are really good pole vaulters can sometimes have no jumps in critical competition. So consistency in pole vault is extremely difficult. But then add on top of that the fact that he's still consistently breaking records makes it all the more remarkable in a sport where consistency is often one of the biggest challenges. So again, it reiterates what you're saying. It's hard to say that to compete against that he's been the outstanding person of the year.
The consistency thing's interesting. Like, I wonder if pole vault still is as inconsistent as it used to be, or whether modern equipment has made it more consistent. The margin for error from one day to the next is smaller. Like, I don't know enough about it, whether the poles that are used by the guys today are very different from what Ockett Brits and Bubka and co were using in the late 90s, early 2000s. But it'll be interesting to look at other than Duplantis, is there high variance in performance in the guys ranked 2 to 6th, and on the women's side? Whereas on the men's side, maybe it's more consistent. I don't know. Like, is Duplantis' consistency an outlier?
I wish I could
as well?
just Google that right now, because I think that's an excellent question. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we could see that the top 10 were variable in terms of who was second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, then we could argue that it's still as variable as it was before. But as I say, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, because I wonder whether, like, our perception of it being inconsistent has been created by Ockett Brits' mental, psychological issues at major championships. But I don't know that for
Yeah,
sure.
but it did happen with a lot of pole vaulters back then. That in being consistent was always the challenge. It wasn't just Ockett Brits; it was a lot of people who struggled with that. But as I say, I don't know what the current status is in terms of people competing against Duplantis at the moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have no objection to Duplantis winning that. I didn't have a
Yeah, I mean,
very strong nominee myself. Obviously, Pogacar dominated cycling in a way we've not seen before. So, whereas Duplantis dominated in a way he has for 3 or 4 more years, maybe we should give it to the guy who's new at dominance, not the guy who's continued it. I don't know. But other than that, I mean, again, Sinner, Alcaraz, they split tennis. So I don't know if you'd have a difficult case to make for either one being the best tennis player, never mind sportsman of the year, because they're so equal to one another. So we'll leave it.
How about Rory McIlroy?
Well, actually, Rory McIlroy was my choice.
Oh, cool.
So he was my choice of sportsman of the year. I don't think he's as strong as Duplantis, but he has only become the sixth man in history to complete all 4 Grand Slams in his career, so that's significant. The last time he won a Grand Slam, how can you believe it? It was 2014, so 11 years ago was the last time he won a Grand Slam, when he won the Masters this year. But I think
last time he won a major is what you mean, yeah?
Sorry. Last time he won a major. Sorry, my apologies. Last time he won a major was in 2014. But I think this year, I think the hype around him at the Ryder Cup, when he had this hostile crowd against him and all his reactions, he still played exceptionally well there. He won the Players' Championships. He won the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am, the Irish Open, and then he won the Race to Dubai title as well. So he's had an amazing year in a sport, a game which in some respects is a bit like pole vaulting, in that you can get 10 players, and often you have a good week or you don't have a good week, and you can be missing the cut one week and winning the championship next week. I think McIlroy is one of the few that's always there and thereabouts, and you feel like he's been unlucky not to have had been more successful, even though he's arguably the preeminent golfer of our generation.
I don't know about that last bit. I don't think he's the best golfer in the world at the moment even. Scheffler is so much better.
I think Scheffler is, yes, but
Yeah.
I think that in terms of
But
maybe Scheffler is actually right. Maybe Scheffler's.
But what I will say, what I was getting at is, I think when you think about sportsmen, you don't just think about how many trophies did I win and what was my scoring average, right? Like, I think you're looking at it as a bigger thing. And there's no doubt, in the last 3 or 4 years, McIlroy became the spokesman for the PGA in the creation of Live Golf. Remember, he was kind of like the vocal person on the one side. He's become an ambassador for the sport more than just winning golf, and then obviously winning his final tournament to complete the career Grand Slam. So I think you can make a case for him being the most influential golfer. But in terms of pure golf ability, Scheffler's remarkable.
Yeah, I can't argue against that. Absolutely. Yeah.
But I think he showed a lot of leadership qualities at the Ryder Cup as well.
Yeah, that too.
I think that sort of tilts it. Whereas the Americans fell apart. I think Rory helped hold.
I'm just biased. I like him. I just like Roy.
Yeah.
I think Roy McIlroy is just a lovely man, and it seems to be a guy who, I love the way he swings a club. I love the way he plays the game. I love the fact that he's got the passion, the fact that he's stuck with it for 11 years before he's won it. I mean, you can imagine at his level, you would expect him to win many, many majors, and he's stuck with 11 years of having not won a major, but it hasn't deterred him from keeping trying, which which you have to admire. So yeah, I think he's just a great example of a good sportsman out there, and a good example to youngsters, whether they are starting the game of golf or people who are playing currently. You know.
Hmm.
Anyway, so a couple more sessions still to go. Sportswoman of the Year. I'm going to mention mine quickly because we can get past it, and maybe I shouldn't have mentioned this because we have already discussed it. I felt like Melissa Jefferson Wooden, purely because she just came out of the woodwork, so to speak, was somebody that I thought could be Sportswoman of the Year, but as we've already discussed, maybe slightly tainted by association, but there's no proof of anything bad happening there right now. And I think in terms of based just on achievements, multiple gold medals at the World Championships, Olympic Games, and particularly a breakthrough event this year at the World Championships, I think makes her my Sportswoman of the Year. Ross, what's your pick?
Probably go Pauline Ferrand-Prévot for reasons we mentioned earlier. The achievement of the year, I ended up persuading myself that it was hers, so I'll give her Sportswoman of the Year. A couple of honourable mentions. I'm showing recency bias here because it's the cyclocross season, and I love the cyclocross season. But did you know that Lucinda Brand has finished on the podium in 52 consecutive cyclocross races?
I think it's 53 now because I was going to use that stat.
Oh, well, no, I think it's
Looked it
52.
up.
I looked it up this morning and it still said 52, although I may be wrong actually. The most recent of which was a win at the weekend in the World Cup in Namur. But the last time she wasn't on the podium was in Benidorm in 2024, January 2024. So in a few weeks from now, it'll be 2 years that she hasn't been off a podium. Now,
Sure.
it's the thing is, she hasn't won the world title. She's been beaten twice by Fem van Empel. So she is a world champ from 2021, if memory serves me. So it's not like she needs it. But if there's ever a cyclist who really wants and would do well to win a world title in January, February, whenever it is, it would be Lucinda Brand. But I wanted to mention that because I think it's quite an incredible streak.
It's a lovely stat.
Yeah, I think it might be 52 actually. I think I might have been a little bit previous.
Given her next week's one in
Nicky got it in
advance.
First. Yeah, I was gonna go with Ferrand Perot, but actually I'm gonna go with the discourse because they had a couple of Josh and Kevin went with Ruth Croft for winning UTMB, which she's now done the Triple Crown of the UTMB races.
That's a good one.
The three of them, the OCC and the CEC, from New Zealand. Ruth Croft. Is such a humble runner as well. So yeah, I'm happy to go with that because I'm in a bit of an ultra running mood at the minute. So yeah, Killian and Ruth, I think for Mike.
I like it. I like it.
Just as well, discourse reminds us of those things because we get so little coverage of the ultra world here in South Africa. You sort of have to go out of your way. And I'll be honest, I don't give it the attention that I probably should, given that it's in our endurance stable. Just other mentions, I suppose. Sabalenka tennis must be the best one. Although Swiatek won Wimbledon, which was a surprise, but didn't do well in the French. So I would probably say Sabalenka is the best there. So she must be on the shortlist, right? If you're the best women's tennis player, you've got to be close to sportswoman. And then Bonmati is the footballer, right? She won World Player of the Year, no? Aitana Bonmati from Spain. So that's got to be mentioned as well,
right.
because again, if you're the best at football, you've got to be pretty high up in the global conversation, given its status in the global sports community.
Mm-hmm. Lucy Charles-Barkley actually got a couple of mentions as well, because obviously she had that blow up, didn't she, in Kona, but then came back a couple of weeks later and won the World Championship, didn't she, in Marbella? Yeah, he won 70.3.
Yeah.
So
did she also win
the T100?
I
think that was one of the most memorable moments.
Yeah. Did she also win the T100? Who won that circuit? Because that seems like a pretty prestigious title to win these days.
She came fifth. I think Kat Matthews won it, didn't she?
Oh, yeah, okay.
She was fifth in the T100.
Yeah, Barkley's a good call. It's a good shout, that one. Certainly in a space that is very competitive at the moment. And
it was,
again,
for me, it was harder to choose a sportswoman of the year than a sportsman of the year.
Yes.
I think that's it shows. I think it's been, again, I think we probably said this time last year, that the women's sports overall is on the rise. I think the Euros, the Rugby World Cup, they really showed that it's on the rise.
Yeah. Ellie Kildan must be high up there for her World Cup rugby contributions. She's not Player of the Year on the women's side. I think that's Sophie de Good from Canada, right? But Ellie Kildane was probably the face and performer of the Rugby World Cup specifically, so that's worth a mention also.
Yeah. Good one. Okay, so now some juicy stuff. The biggest villain of the year. Can you guys compete with Evan Etzebeth as the biggest villain of the year?
That's recency
Evan
bias. there,
Etzebeth, for
surely.
those of you who don't know the incident, Evan Etzebeth, the eye gouging incident against Wales, given a 12-week ban, and for us here in South Africa, as Gareth already mentioned, really tainted the Springbok performance this year just from that one instance. And he's apologised and all that sort of thing. But to me, I don't understand how somebody with his experience, the most capped Springbok in history, I know he was provoked, he was slapped, he was punched, and all sorts of things that happened on that we don't know about on the field. But you just think that somebody of his caliber should be able to restrain himself and behave within the laws of the game. Maybe I'm being too harsh. I've never been on a rugby field. I've never had things happen to me on a rugby pitch like he does. But still, I just would have expected better from somebody of his caliber, and it was massively disappointing for me that he did that.
Especially in this,
That's
in a
my call,
game
Ross.
where like the stakes were so low. Like even if it was
Stakes were zero.
like if it was a,
But yeah,
if it
sorry,
was,
sorry, Gareth.
if it's a, if
I
it's
said
a,
the stakes were zero. Yeah.
if it's a close game, if that game was close, okay, cool, you could say this. But even if it was a close game, it's still a meaningless game, actually, in the larger scheme of things. So it was a game lacking real meaning at a time when the scoreboard gave it like zero meaning, and so yeah, it's a disappointing action to take. And he subsequently wrote a sort of post on Instagram to try and offer his side, which I think is human nature. Like I can understand why someone wants to do that, because you don't want to be misunderstood or feel like you're misunderstood. So he's made that attempt to try and explain himself, but in hindsight, it's probably something better left unsaid. You know, rather just say I'm sorry and leave it. You know, so it's because he can't justify it.
Yeah. Yeah. Gareth? Sorry, Ross, I mean, have you got a villain of the year? Or do we concur?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think a 3 seconds action doesn't qualify you as the biggest villain in the year. To me, the biggest villain of the year are the people who have deliberated over the course of 2 years to try and create the enhanced games, which they're selling under one premise, but really is like a thinly disguised attempt to sell anti-aging products to a gullible population. And they're villains because what they're doing is actually evil. Like it's just a money grab, you know, and they're willing to throw a lot of money. The funders that Aaron D'Souza has gotten onto this thing, and Gareth signed up. I don't know, you still signed up to their newsletter, but some of the stuff that they were sharing around how you could join and get advice on how you could use banned substances as well. It didn't matter who you were. They were going to give you this pseudo-medical advice about how you too could capitalize on the advancements driven by the enhanced games to use anti-aging drugs, namely growth hormone and testosterone, I assume. And to me, they're corrupting sport.
That would have been my villain of the year, because I can't really think of any particular person who I'd aim it at. So yeah, I mean it's May 2026. We'll find out. The proof will be in the pudding, so to speak. But I don't think they really care as long as it's just airtime and a chance to sell drugs.
Yep, exactly.
Or anti-aging or whatever. So yeah,
I would say there's consensus there. I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean some others would be. There've been some Ruth Chepngetich, world record holder in the marathon, was done. Like, how crazy is this? Well, that was this year, was it?
Adopa's villains. That was last year. She got busted this year. She got a sentence this year, but she got busted last year.
I knew it was last year. Yeah, Adopa's are villains. Definitely.
Okay.
Well, I mean, in some respects, as we've heard in the podcast just before this one, where we talked to the international I forget now his name.
You saw it.
I've got a cold in my head. It's fuzzy. Yeah. No. The International Integrity, I think it's Integrity Unit, yes.
Brett Clothier,
But they talk about, Brett Clothier talks a little bit about the fact that the positive Kenyan cases are actually probably a positive more than a negative, because the Kenyan testing system is probably one of the most robust in the world right now. So as much as we see Kenyan athletes being bust as a negative, what we actually must look at it is to say, well, the Kenyans are actually doing probably more than most countries in terms of looking after and trying to find drug cheats.
Yeah.
So we can't villainize them because they're probably been more under the microscope and actually doing great stuff. So yeah, I wouldn't make them a villain. I'd almost make them a hero in some respects.
Yeah, but not the
Maybe
doping
that's pushing it
athletes.
too
Not
much,
the
but
doping athletes.
not the doping athletes themselves, but
Yeah.
the fact that the Kenyan doping cases are actually not what we think they are in terms of the fact that everybody in Kenya is doping. That's not the case.
Yeah, and not just Kenya, like
they're
the
just
whole world. Like anyone who's
yeah,
used a banned substance and the person who gave it to them and advised them, they're villains in my book, you know.
100%. Yeah,
Just on that, speaking of sort of systematic villainy, anyone who still hasn't figured out that women need a closed sport is a villain. And I'd hope that, last year in this show, I said one of my hopes for 2025 would be that everyone in sport would finally see sense. The IOC still haven't. There's a report that the IOC are looking and figuring out how to see sense. But until they announce it, I'm not going to commit to anything with those guys. But we've had a few dramas this year. Luckily, fewer than the year before and fewer than the year before that. So I think it's heading in the right direction. But any sport that's still allowing males to win women's trophies and titles and take women's places is a villain in my book.
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
I was going to say, well, we did have a category. We'll just touch on it quickly. The biggest scientific advancement in sport, because I couldn't think of particularly much apart from the carb fueling paradigm that's going on. But I suppose a scientific advancement would be ring fencing of women's sport, or not ring fencing, but
Now that's exactly what I had. Is actually the carb fueling aspect. That was the biggest advancement. Now exactly what I had with you, Gareth, on
I
that
think,
one.
yeah, it's like 95% of podcasts seem to be about carbs, and I think people are all carbed out. But Ross, as the sports scientist, what would you say is the biggest scientific advancement in sport?
So I'm showing
And are you deeply involved in it?
Tremendous degree of bias here. But the biggest scientific advancement to me is the instrument of mouthguard in terms of understanding head impacts and concussions in collision sports. And it's not just rugby union. Obviously, that's where I'm involved for disclosure, but it's rugby league, it's AFL, the NFL are also using them sometimes in mouthguards in the college game and sometimes in the helmet. But it's this idea that we have to now measure every single head impact, not just the ones that cause concussion. So 10 years ago when I started out, it was about concussions. You wait for the incident, the clinical outcome. And that was that was like a 1 in 300 tackle. Every 300th tackle or so was causing a concussion. But all 300 could potentially cause a head impact. It's just that so many of them weren't causing concussions. And what the mouthguards have given us is the ability to measure the other 299. And that opens up huge potential for managing head impacts. And some of the interesting stuff is a player will make 100 tackles. Only about 50 to 60 of those cause a head impact or head acceleration as measured by the mouthguard, which means 40 didn't. So what's the difference between a tackle that causes head acceleration and a tackle that does? And if we can understand that, then we can try and get more of the one that doesn't and fewer of the ones that do. And we can start documenting which players are more likely to have head accelerations than others. And we know this because two players in the same position who play the same number of matches and the same number of minutes will have a threefold difference in how many head accelerations they've had. So is one of those players protected and the other one is vulnerable? And if so, why? Can we figure out how to make the vulnerable people more protected? Those are all kinds of things. And we've actually just submitted a paper in the last few days which broadly will take us from measurement, which is what we've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years, to management. So now we're going to say, here's a list. Think of it as a leaderboard, not a leaderboard you want to be on top of, but here's a list of all the players who've got the highest head acceleration counts in the world. Like over the last 3 weeks, these are the 10 players who've had more head accelerations than anyone else. And what we want to do is we want to put the ball back in the court of the clubs and say, that's a player who is playing 80 minutes and they're having so many more head accelerations than their peers. What are you going to do about it? They could either play less, or we've got to figure out, are they tackling and carrying and being involved in contacts recklessly? Can we change their technique? Is it neck strength? What's the intervention? So that's where the mouthguard is open. That was a world that a year ago was not even, there was no door to that universe, but the mouthguards have opened the door and now we're looking into it, and that's where we hope we get to next.
Yeah, so I mean, it's an amazing bit of technology. I wonder. I mean, I don't know whether Ross, you guys in the World Rugby have thought about this. Is there potential for further applications for this mouth guard where you could potentially look at heart rate and HRV and blood pressure and all sorts of other metrics where you could actually then look at a player and say, look, that player is fatigued, therefore they need to come off the field, or that player has done X amount of exercise above a certain heart rate, therefore they need to come off now, and therefore we can substitute at the right time. Do you think there's any further application for this and this technology?
Uh, I think they'd be misguided applications. I mean, when GPS units came into the sport, there were coaches who were doing that. They had targeted that a player, for instance, might run 2.1 kilometers in a sevens match, and when that player hit that target, they pulled them off, sometimes to their detriment. So I don't know if you would want to be dogmatic about it, but in terms of like if you're a high performance manager, coach, S&C guy, sports scientist at a professional club of any sport, you've got a whole suite of tools or a toolbox that you can use to try and track player load, right? And we did a podcast on load this year. There was this podcast for everything. And totally forgot about that one actually. But you could imagine now you've got distance run, you can measure heart rate, you can measure the player's subjective perception of fatigue. With the instrumented mouthguards, you can now measure, for want of a better term, head load or head impact load. You can measure other soft things. You can do surveys and player questionnaires. You could do sleep quality now. There's all sorts of measurable data. So if I'm working with players and those players are my assets and I need them performing 25 weekends a year, like now I've got every possible tool. Like, what are you still missing, you know? So we hope that it becomes part of like the coach's toolbox and that they prioritize it. It's been a challenge though, I'll tell you, because even doctors, there are still many doctors who still think that the mouthguard needs to diagnose a concussion. If you have a big impact, you might be concussed. If you don't have a big head acceleration event, we leave you on the field. And we never ever wanted to be like that. And getting that message across is frustrating. I know top level coaches are saying the only reason we're using the mouthguard is because you tell us we have to. And we have to evolve away from that understanding. So it's been difficult, but that's what we want it to be, is a load measurement tool and a monitoring and a management tool.
Yeah. All right, so last two sections, favorite sporting moment of the year. I think we've kind of covered this in many different ways, but I don't know whether anybody's got anything additional thing they want to add in terms of a moment in sporting history. We've spoken about sportswomen, sportsmen, sports team. Gareth, any sporting moment that you've had this year that you really remember?
No, it was that 1500-meter final, and I've
Yeah.
already mentioned that with Nader coming around the bend. Thought that was fantastic. So yeah, I'm happy with that one.
Yeah. You, Ross?
The single sports thing I watched most, repeated this year, was the finish of the men's marathon in Tokyo. I was at a World Rugby conference in London, and I remember sitting during the tea break in between sessions watching it and then showing other people, like, come and check this out. This is unbelievable. You won't believe this. And even people who've never watched a marathon finish in their lives went, oh my God, that's unbelievable. So that has to be the other spectacular sports thing of the year. It was probably the only blood pressure raising moment in the cycling season was when Van der Poel and Pogacar raced Milan-San Remo, and Pogacar attacked so hard on the Cipressa, and he pulled Van der Poel and Ganna away with him, and then Van der Poel counted him on the Poggio. That was cool. At that stage, I thought, geez, if the cycling season's going to be like this is going to be fabulous, because that was good.
Yeah. That was my sporting moment of the year. I thought that was amazing because it showed that Pogacar doesn't have to win everything, can be beaten, and Van der Poel kind of for the first time was going head to head to him in a real way with no excuses, and it was a fantastic result. And the fact that Gannon was in amongst them was absolutely amazing to me. So yeah, it was that must be my favorite event of the year, just in terms of the way it pans out. You know, you've got this climb which isn't massively steep, but steep enough to create a break, and everybody from the big powerful riders can do it. Then you've got this descent where it's this death defying descent, and then if you survive that, then you can have to do a sprint at the end of it. It's just extraordinary. So of all the classic events, I still think that's one of the best, and this year was certainly one that I will never forget.
Have you seen the drone footage of them descending the Poggio into the finish?
Yes.
Yes, it's cool, eh?
It's incredible.
So cool.
I know, it's absolutely incredible. It's descending masterclasses. I mean, I remember when Matty Mohoric was going down that descent, and with a dropper post, so he could descend even faster than the rest of them. I mean, there's a real skill to descending. So it is the measure of it's the pure measure of a pure cyclist, in my opinion. That whole setup, you've got to be able to climb, you've got to have power, you've got to have skills, you've got to have a sprinting ability potentially, and you've got to be tactically nuanced as well.
The thing is now,
So
though,
yeah, it is an amazing.
yeah, the thing is now, Milan San Remo is like 300 or 290k of boring, and then 13k of just like the
Boring.
most insane. It's like at the 20 minutes of the most incredible cycling, especially because Pogacar's now not waiting for the last climb anymore. He'll go again next year. He'll attack on the Cipressa again. So you get these.
Yes.
But it goes to show, I mean, they're climbing those things at 35, 36k an hour, right? So like there's a significant draft benefit. So to create separation from pro guys at that gradient and at those speeds, how much more power you've got than they've got. It's wild.
Yeah.
And that's where people say,
Yeah.
oh, but Pogacar didn't win Milan San Remo. But just the fact that he's in the conversation with two big attacks on not steep climbs is like, that alone is remarkable. When last was a Tour de France guy doing that?
Yeah.
Because like Flanders, this is the problem. Like the monuments, that's the only competitive monument now, I think. Maybe Flanders, if Van Aert, Van der Poel,
Flanders.
and now Thibaut Nys are good. But if Pogacar's as good as he was this year, he's riding away from everyone again in Flanders next year.
I think you're forgetting that Flanders was very close for a long time. That was a superb race with Pedersen, Wout van Aert.
Yeah, but
There's
it was
a lot
close.
in the mix. Don't underestimate that, man. And I'm amazed you two, and I'm going to have to bring it up because I thought one of you was bound to choose it as your moment, was Yates on that stage at the Giro.
That wasn't
Yes.
even the best stage of the Giro, in my opinion. The best stage in the Giro was the dirt stage into Siena. That was cool.
Is that the one where they crashed?
Roglic went down in that one, I think.
Yeah.
Was it Roglic? Did Roglic do the Giro?
Because the Giro was actually a good tour this
The
year.
Giro was good. It was the best Grand Tour. But that stage into Siena was gladiatorial, like when they were going through the dust and you could see how they were kicking it up, and that was unbelievably good. And then Van Aert and Del Toro came into, I've completely forgotten the name, Siena, into Siena at the end there on that steep cobble, the way Strada Bianca finishes. Van Aert won that stage against Del Toro. But I thought that was the best Grand Tour stage of the year, and certainly the best one in that race. I thought it was mega cool. And the Giro was good. I mean, that last day was like enthralling. The problem again on that last day is that it ended too soon. You know, like you could see that Del Toro and Carapaz weren't going to go and chase down Yates. And so there was no jeopardy for the last half an hour, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just taking a step back, don't forget that also Van der Poel won Paris-Roubaix, beating Pogacar. So that was another against the books as well. So,
but how is that?
it wasn't
How is that
all
against?
together.
But again, like how is that against the books? It's a 64 kilo like climber, matching the 72 kilogram like runaway like Shinkansen Japanese train express on the cobbles. Like he shouldn't be there.
Yes, but he is the most extraordinary rider we've ever seen. But he is beatable. He is beatable. I think that's the message.
He's beatable when every single odd is stacked against him. He can be beaten. So yeah, he's beatable.
That was Mike poking his stick between the bars of the cage to get a reaction. That was.
Anyway, no, fair play.
I actually should say that my highlight this year, because it was a personal one, was actually being at the World Championships in Rwanda and watching that stuff happening live in front of me and seeing all those top riders. It was extraordinary, and seeing the crowd support was brilliant. I still think it's, some people say it's one of the best World Championships ever in terms of atmosphere. I can't dispute that. I think it was amazing, and I think Africa put on a good show. In the global context, maybe not there, but from a personal perspective, just being able to experience a World Championships on the ground is, it was a real privilege, and I hope that I can do another one sometime soon, because it's something to really enjoy. So, final question is for both of you: is our hopes for 2026? And this is an open-ended question. So I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask Gareth to give us his view on your hopes for 2026, sporting and otherwise, potentially.
I'm just going to keep it sort of semi-personal with discourse, because there's a thread on there with people's plans for 2026. And so I'm hoping that everybody who's got a plan for 2026, if you're on discourse or just a listener, you get to sort of carry it out. You don't get injured, and you have a good 2026. and whatever you're planning to do actually comes to fruition, or at least you give it a good go. Because I think the one thing we forget about sport is that it's not always about success. It's about it's about the journey along the way, as they say, which is an old cliche, but it's very true. And one of the words that was bandied about on there quite a lot was consistency. And that's something that I'm looking for in 2026, is to be a little bit more consistent in my training. And so for
Yeah.
everybody out there, that's my hope, that everybody get out there at least has a go at what they want to do. Get to the start line, even if you don't get to the finish.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Ross have the final words. I'm gonna throw in my hopes for 2026. I think we saw this year that we had Malcolm Gladwell on our podcast, and I think that one of my game goals is to try and really focus on getting some of the big celebrities in sport on our podcast. I think there's a real opportunity for us to get people on the. I've got a couple of people in mind which I don't want to talk about right now, but I'm aiming at a couple of big names this year because we really want to kind of explore some of the intricacies of some of well, any sport really. I mean, whether it's the next year we've got some stuff planned for the Winter Olympics, which I think is going to be very interesting to see what happens there. And it's not something that any of us sit and we don't dream about the Winter Olympics, but it becomes fascinating. I want to get people involved in that space to really talk about what it's like in those winter sports and focus on the sports where we don't normally go. Maybe we get somebody to talk to us about Formula One because it's not something that we know about. So ideally, it's about finding the people that bring us into their world that we don't know much about to educate us as hosts on their particular sport, whether it's Formula One or curling or whatever it is. I find all these different sports fascinating, and I find the people that are involved with them quite fascinating. And Ross, final word from you. What are your hopes for 2026?
Yeah, Winter Olympics for sure. I hope we can cover it well. I hope I can watch a lot of it because, like, I see winter and snow sports literally every fourth year, but I love it when I do. So, and in fact, we have got a few people who've already reached out. One of our new supporters club members emailed me yesterday saying that they were involved quite heavily in winter sports, and I'm going to explore that definitely. So if you're listening to this, Leslie, I have got your email. I'll reply. There's a few other names in the winter sports world who will get on. Football World Cups next year in the US. I hope it's not massively tarnished by stupid political grandstanding, but given that it's Trump and FIFA, I'm not hopeful that that's not going to happen. The last World Cup was one of the great sports events I've ever seen. I thought that the one I know there was a lot around it, but I thought some of the matches, and then particularly that final between France and Argentina. So I hope that 2026 lives up to 2022. I hope that cycling is more competitive. We've said that already. I've got hope. I mean, I watched the cyclocross race at the last weekend, and Thibaut Nace, for the first time in 2 years, followed a Van der Poel attack in a cyclocross race. So I've got some hope there. Of course, it might mean Van der Poel's a level down, in which case it'll be even worse next year, but we'll see. What else do I hope? Yeah, and then just from personal perspective, that the podcast continues to, like, I'd say continue to grow, but like we've kind of reached a level of equilibrium now. So we've got to find a new way to advance and grow. So I'm hopeful that we can find ways to do that. We've got some ideas that we want to pursue in the new year. So those would be mine. And then given that I had a little rant about sports science's failures, I hope that we can try and address some of those in 2026.
Well, Gareth and Ross, thanks very much for your time, and as always. And for all of you who listen to our podcast this week, a big thank you to you guys, and especially to our Discourse members who, as you've heard in this podcast, contribute not only a small monthly sum to be part of our Discourse channel, but many of you contribute many of the subjects that we discuss on this channel, and a lot of expertise as well. So thank you very much for your contributions for that. We're going to take a short break on the podcast until the middle of January. We already have some very great podcasts lined up for middle of January going forward into February. And of course, as Ross has mentioned, we've got the Winter Olympics, which we're focused on next year. Don't forget you can interact with us on our various media and Instagrams and on Twitter and that sort of thing. So please feel free to do that, or X as it's called now. But again, thank you very much, and thank you to Ross and Gareth. But for now, it's goodbye.